welcome to Crime in Court. My name is Heather, and this is the 1993 Menendez brothers trial. So we are going through the first trial of Eric and Lyle Menendez, who are on trial for the homicides of their parents, Jose and Kitty. This homicide took place August of 1989. So we're a couple of years from when it happened. They've been in jail and waiting for their trial. And this first trial was split into two, so they actually have two juries and two sets of defense attorneys, both one set of prosecutors, but two sets of defense attorneys, one for Eric and one for Lyle. So this case is a little bit different than others, and it's interesting to watch. However, in the second trial, they only had one jury, and that was that for the boys. So, and they kept out a lot of the stuff that is going to be presented today. So, as you are well aware, the boys, or maybe you're not, but the boys had admitted to the homicides of their parents. The problem is years and years of SA, CA that was going on in that house led the boys to, the question is, did that all lead the boys to doing the homicide, to committing the death of his parents? And this is probably going to get demonetized anyway, so I probably shouldn't even speak in YouTube code because of the topics that are going to be discussed today. So we've been going through the trial. Obviously, we've gone through the state's case, which was relatively short, especially compared to the defense's case. And now we have the defense putting on neighbors, family members, and all that kind of thing. We're finally, and tennis coaches, swim coaches, people who have been around the family for different reasons, and talking about how their interactions were. A lot of them testified that Jose and Kitty were never affectionate with their boys. They never showed really support. It was always like, well, you should have done this better. After they would, say, win a tournament, they would still be told why they did it wrong by their parents. At every given second, they would be given some kind of negative criticism or something. And there's no way to live like that and not come out without some mental health damage because someone of Jose's stature and status, try and control the domineering individual that he is, which we've heard. He's very domineering, he's controlling. Kitty was very unstable emotionally. So today we're going to hear from people who can corroborate things about Jose and Kitty. Kitty more so than Jose, but a little bit about Jose. So the first person up on the stand is Dr. Edwin Cox. He is Kitty's therapist. And then after him, we're just so you know what's ahead. Um, there's going to be trigger warning. I've got the trigger trigger warning up on the screen, and I'm just going to leave it there for the whole episode. There's going to be sensitive material that's going to be discussed. It's not graphic, you're not going to see anything, but it's just the discussion of graphic material, graphic content about male on male essay when it comes to children. So just this whole trial is about that, so just be aware. All right, so first up, Dr. Edwin Cox, Kitty's therapist. We're going to also hear from her psychiatric physician after him, who basically he prescribes the medication and regulates her dosage. And this guy who we're going to hear from, he actually treated her with like talk therapy. So she would have told more to Dr. Edwin Cox potentially. Um, but even then, like, she didn't see these individuals for very long periods of time. I think she only saw Dr. Cox 16 times. So after After him and her psychiatric physician, we will hear from a Dr. Carrie English, and he evaluated Lyle and Eric medically, and he went through their medical records. There's going to be some graphic talk in there. And then after that, Edward Fenno, who was a friend of the boys, he was a friend of Lyle's from Princeton, I believe, and then he came to stay at the Menendez house for a couple weeks. And we'll hear what he has to say and what his uh, recollections are of the Menendez parents and the family, basically how they all got along. So I am going to say full disclosure here. So, sorry, that was kind of a long intro, especially if you already know the case. But um, I've gone through this. This is now my third time recording this. So I just want you guys to know I'm going to be here, but in the background, I'm going to probably go off screen just because I don't need to listen to all of this for a third time. What I will say after listening to all this testimony today, this in this part seven, um, I fully believe that Jose and Kitty they probably suffered from personality disorders, especially narcissistic personality, or at least they both had narcissistic traits, is what I'm going to say. I can't diagnose them, I don't know. But even her physician, her psychiatric physician, does diagnose Kitty with a personality disorder potentially, but he doesn't name what it is. And back then, I don't know if we were as aware of narcissistic personality. I'm sure in therapy they were, but not to the normal layperson. So, yeah, they probably wouldn't understand it anyways. So, um, yeah, so that's where I've been through this enough, and I don't want to keep reiterating the same parts and portions. So I'm gonna pretty much let this play through the whole time. Like I said, I'm gonna have it on in the background. I'm listening today for the Karen Reed verdict as well. So I'm kind of, I'm doing multiple things at once. So don't think I'm not here. I'm just not going to be as intent on my commentary today. And like I was saying, so I believe that they are both, they have narcissistic personalities or traits of narcissistic personality disorder. And Jose, especially, we've heard is domineering, he's controlling, just his presence in a room can like suck up all the energy. So we're going to see that, a lot of Kitty's actions even had to do with Jose. So, anyways, my point is it was just like this horrible concoction, this mixture of personality disorders and mental health, other mental health issues, and this controlling, domineering personality. And I just think it was this horrible, volatile combination of the two that made them bring out the worst in each other potentially. And um, obviously, there's nothing worse than, in my opinion, there's pretty much nothing worse than what Jose did to his own children. So I'll just leave it at that. Sorry for the very, very long intro. Um, but I just want to let you know I'm not going to be talking as much. I'm going to go off camera, but I'm here. So let's get started with Dr. Edwin Cox, Kitty's therapist. Take it away, Dr. Cox.
My name is Edwin S. Cox.
Spell your last name, please.
C-O-X.
Okay. Dr. Cox, are you a licensed therapist?
Yes.
And do you have a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD?
Yes, I do.
And is your bachelor's in economics?
Yes.
And your master's in marriage, family, and child counseling?
Yes.
And your PhD in sociology or family therapy?
Yes.
And when were you licensed?
I was first licensed in 1976.
And what is required to become licensed?
In California, the license requirements include a 2-year master's degree in marriage and family therapy, 3,000 hours of supervised clinical experience, and then successful completion of a written exam, and then successful completion of an oral exam.
And since the time you became licensed, have you been practicing as a family therapist?
Yes, I have.
And can you approximate for us how many client hours you think you may have logged in that period of time?
Probably over 15,000 hours.
And do you currently teach at the graduate level in this field?
Yes, I do.
And what is it that you teach?
I teach several courses in the marriage and family therapy program. I teach marriage counseling, I teach couple therapy, I teach a variety of courses related to that degree.
And these are people who are working on their master's degree?
Yes.
And what school are you teaching at?
It's called the California Family Study Center. It's in North Hollywood.
And are you active in any professional organizations?
Yes.
And could you tell us what professional organizations you're active in?
I'm active in several, the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, and the American Family Therapy Academy.
In fact, have you been president of one of those organizations?
I was president of the Southern California Division of the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy.
And in October 1986, did you become a therapist for Kitty Menendez?
Yes.
And did you see her a total of 16 times between October 1986 and February 1987?
Yes.
And were 3 of those sessions joint sessions with her and her husband, Jose Menendez?
Yes.
And was one of those sessions with Jose Menendez alone?
Yes.
With regard to your initial sessions with Kitty Menendez, what is the first step that you engage in whenever you begin treating a patient?
Well, the first thing I do is to listen to what caused them to call and come in. And then early, one of the things that I begin to do is to take a family history, to learn about some of the issues from their family of origin that help them get to where they are today.
What is the importance of knowing about their family of origin?
Yeah, let's just get on to those matters for which the witness was called, please.
Did you take such a history of Kitty Menendez?
Yes, I did.
And were you able, during the course of time you were treating her, to arrive at certain diagnoses?
Yes.
And did you arrive at any diagnosis with regard to whether she had any alcohol or substance abuse problems?
Yes.
And what was your diagnosis in that regard?
Well, she did have a dependence on alcohol and prescription drugs.
And what was the basis for your opinion in that regard?
She talked about her drinking patterns. She drank every day. She was proud that she drank cognac. And
What do you mean she was proud she drank cognac?
it was important to her that people think well of her, and I think she thought that cognac was a high-class alcohol.
Did you form an opinion as to whether this alcohol dependence was a recent phenomena or a long-term problem?
Yes, it was a long-term problem for her.
Did you form any opinion as to whether she was suicidal?
Yes.
And how is it that she came to be a patient of yours?
She was referred to me by a therapist in New Jersey who called me and said that he had a client who was moving to California, and he was worried about her depression and her suicidality.
So was that one of the first areas that you looked at
Yes.
with regard to her? And did you find her to be suicidal?
Yes.
What was the basis for that opinion?
Well, she talked of killing herself and of the depression and anger that she felt, and she talked about how she would do it. She talked about previous attempts at doing that, so it was a serious threat.
And what is the dynamic of suicide? Is this just exclusively someone who's in a great deal of pain, or does it have another purpose in a family setting, the impact of it?
Objection, proper opinion is irrelevant.
Overrule.
Well, the reasons for suicide are very complicated, but one of them would be it's too painful to be alive. Another reason would be that for some people it's the only way of getting back at somebody and expressing their anger at someone.
And did you have any impression as to whether there was someone that she wanted to get back at?
Yes, I did.
And what was that? Who was that?
That was Jose, her husband.
And this was to punish him for something?
She was extremely angry at him for having had an extramarital affair that she knew about, and I think one of the main reasons that she was suicidal was because it was so hurtful for her and to punish her husband.
And in addition to punishing her husband, it would obviously have an impact on her children.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Objection, cause for speculation and this is right.
Well, the objection is sustained. The answer is recognized to the form of the question.
Did you have an opinion as to whether the impact this would have on her children was of significance to her?
Yes.
And what was that?
The impact on the children would have been secondary to her.
What do you mean by that?
I think her purpose was to punish her husband, and she didn't think much about the effect on her children.
Did you diagnose her to be depressed?
Yes.
And did you find that to be a recent occurrence or a long-term problem?
No, initially I thought it might be just related to the discovery of the affair, but as I learned subsequently, it had been a long-term condition for her for many, many years.
And what are the symptoms of the depression? How did it manifest itself?
Well, sleeplessness, withdrawal, sometimes bursts of anger, but kind of withdrawal from life, lots of sadness, tears.
And when you say sometimes bursts of anger, bursts of rage, is that one of the symptoms?
Well, when someone's depressed, they don't talk a lot, and so their feelings build up, and every now and then, in some people, those feelings emerge in bursts of anger or rage, as you said. That would be true.
Are those bursts of anger or rage always rational?
Can we clarify, is this a discussion of general symptomology or specific to Mrs. Menendez?
With regard to Mrs. Menendez, did you find that these were symptoms that she manifested, the
Yes.
ones that you've described?
Yes.
Okay, and with regard to her, would the bursts of rage be rationally based, or would they just be spontaneous explosions?
With her, some
Objection, improper opinion by
Well,
foundation.
sustained as to the form of the question. I think the witness used the phrase burst of anger.
Okay, bursts of anger. With regard to the bursts of anger, did you find that these would be rationally based or would just be something else?
Objection, improper opinion.
You have to lay a foundation first.
Do you have information with regard to the symptoms that you've discussed?
yes.
And what information do you have with regard to the crying that you talked about?
Not the information itself, but how you got the information.
She told me about how she would have fits of crying, fits of anger, and the anger would be triggered by an event, and the response or her anger might be much more severe than the triggering event would have naturally caused.
You had information about her not only from herself but from her husband, is that
Yes.
correct? Did you find her to be an obsessive personality?
Yes.
And what was the basis for that opinion?
Well, the first meeting I had with her, she told me that she constantly read self-help books, and in our sessions together, she was very, very focused on her husband's affair, and it was very difficult for her to consider or discuss anything else.
And did she describe any efforts in connection with that affair? That
Yes,
struck you as
yes, she
obsessive?
did. Once she found out about it, she wanted to find out everything about it. She went through her husband's American Express card receipts from his office. She even flew to New York, and she told me that she stood outside the address of the woman he had the affair with and waited for her to come out onto the street so that she could see her. And then she walked past her so that she could see her up close. And she was constantly thinking about her and her husband, the affair with her.
Now, you saw her you had 16 sessions,
16
is that correct?
sessions.
And did she talk about this woman, Louise, in the first session?
Every time. Every session.
Did she seem to be able to get beyond Louise and deal with any other issues?
Objection, false or speculation.
Rephrase the question, please.
Was Louise and the affair the focus of every session you had with her?
It would have been if it had been her choice, and the attempts that I made to move to other areas were difficult for me to move to other areas. She kept going back to that issue.
Did she appear to be consumed by this affair?
Yes.
Did she appear to be consumed by her own pain?
Yes.
You are a family counselor, in
Yes.
part, is that correct? Did you form an opinion as to the effect of this on her as a parent?
Yes, I thought about that. I thought that she was not available.
At this point, I move to strike the speculation on part of the witness, lack of foundation.
Sustained.
Thank you. Based on your training and experience, having seen that she was depressed and obsessed and alcohol dependent and suicidal, were you able to form an opinion with regard to her availability as a parent?
Objection, improper opinion, false or speculation.
Overruled.
Yes, that's one of the things that we're trained to do in family therapy. The actions of any member of a family impact all the other members of the family. And so it was natural for me to be concerned or to be interested in her availability to the other members of her family. She was so focused on Jose and the affair that she was not available to, I think at that time, one of her sons was living at home, and she was not available for that relationship.
Is one of the things that you look at in a family where the alliances are, who is connected to whom?
Yes, it is.
And what opinion, if any, did you form in that regard in this family?
Objection, improper opinion.
Sustained. Sustained.
Were you able to make a determination as to who was the most important person in the family to Kitty Menendez?
Yes,
And what was that?
Jose was.
Your Honor, move to strike the speculation on part of the witness. Improper opinion.
Overruled. The answer will stand.
So it would have been Jose rather than the children.
Oh, absolutely.
Is one of the things you look for in treating a patient whether they have any outside resources, relatives,
Yes.
family members, etc.?
Yes, in someone who's suicidal, that's one of the first things we do is to find out what the support systems are, family members or friendship.
And did you find that she had any support system outside the family in terms of either friends or relatives?
No, she recently moved from New Jersey to California. She had said that she had no friends in California and no relatives here. So the only real support for her at that time appeared to be her husband.
And what about friends from Princeton, from where she'd moved? Did she indicate she had close
She
relationships?
said she had acquaintances, but she had really not formed close friendships with people in New Jersey, and certainly didn't want them to know about what was going on with her.
And you had her family history, so you knew that she had a number of living siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes, but she didn't feel that they would be supportive.
Did she indicate that she had confided her problems in them?
Objection, false or double hearsay.
Sustained.
Was Mrs. Menendez someone who was open about her problems, or was she very private?
Objection, vague as to in general or with his witness.
Yeah, rephrase the question.
In your experience with her, did you find her to be a very private person?
Yes,
Did you find that public appearance was extremely important to her?
very important to her, yes.
Did you discuss with her the option of divorce?
Yes.
And what was her position with regard to divorce?
Overruled.
She told me that that was really out of the question. She did not want to consider that.
Why?
Objection, false or hearsay.
Well, rephrase the question. It does call for possibly a conclusion on the part of the witness, unless you phrase it as far as what she said.
Thank you. Did you discuss with her the advisability or the option of divorce?
Yes, we talked about the option of divorce.
And did she indicate to you what her feelings were in that regard?
Yes, she did not want to consider divorce. She stated that she loved her husband very much, although she was very angry with him, and that why should she divorce? She had no place to go.
And did she express any feelings with regard to what a divorce would say about her in the eyes of the community? In terms of whether it be a personal failure of some sort? Or...
Yes, it was important. Appearances were very important, and a divorce would have demonstrated that that family had failed. And that was important to her that it not look that way.
That the family looked successful?
Yes.
And even if that meant staying in a very painful marriage?
Yes.
Did she express to you any concerns with regard to her son Lyle and his girlfriends that struck you as inappropriate?
I think she said that Lyle was in Princeton at the time, and he had a girlfriend named Jamie, I think, that Kitty did not approve of. And she said that her husband also did not approve of her because she was older, and she said that she was taking him places sexually that he was not prepared to go, and that struck me as very odd.
Why?
Objection to proper opinion.
Sustain.
Did you discuss with her whether, strike that, is part of the therapeutic session to try and get someone to understand if they have some views that maybe are not very healthy for them to have, or to try and let them look at things a little bit differently?
Sometimes, yes.
And if you hear something that seems inappropriate or unhealthy, do you try to point that out to them and deal with those issues with them so they can get a new perspective?
Sometimes. I did not do that in this case.
Why?
I saw it as odd, but it was part of the pattern of her character, and it fit with who she seemed to be, so I wasn't going to debate that with her or try to say anything else about that.
Why was it part of the pattern of her character?
Well, I think, again, the appearances of the family were very important, and this wasn't just her opinion, it was Jose's too, according to her, but what she said was this would not have been a suitable wife for the family. It would not have been a trophy for the family, and that's what they wanted to see in a daughter-in-law.
Because of the various conditions you diagnosed, did you determine whether she was the kind of person who would be crying all of the time, or would there be periods when she could function?
Objection to speculation.
Overall. She cried a lot of the time, but she talked about the time she had to pull herself together to go someplace, to a soccer game or to a tennis match or to some kind of an event, and then she talked about how she would then return from that and then feel sad again, but she had to pull herself together for the appearances of the family.
So she could function?
Yes.
At times? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you said that you met with Jose Menendez jointly with Kitty on 3 occasions and by himself on 1. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And were you able to make some determinations as to who he was?
Let's rephrase that.
Was it important to understand Jose Menendez in order to help Kitty Menendez?
Yes.
And did you attempt to do so?
Yes.
Okay. And who did you find him to be?
Let's rephrase that. Who he is was Jose Menendez, so you have to rephrase
What
it.
personality characteristics did you observe in him?
Okay. Well, he was a very, very strong personality, very bright, quick, very dominating. His presence was felt every instant that he was in the room. Very much in control of every situation in our sessions together.
How would he demonstrate that control? Would he yell and take control of the conversation, or what would he do?
Well, he would take control of the conversation, but also he would indicate his opinion with a look or a word, and Kitty would react to that very quickly.
Did you react to that?
At first I thought it was curious, and I would talk to him about that, and then it became very clear that once he made an opinion or a statement, that was a closed subject. He was not interested in discussing it or debating anything. So I came to learn that when he said something or looked a certain way, that the case was closed, or the conversation was closed for him.
And you said that you saw Kitty respond to these,
Yes.
One word or one look.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And did she respond immediately if he
Oh, yeah.
made a
If she
gesture?
began to say something, and I sensed that he didn't like what she was saying, he would look at her, or he would grunt or something, non-verbally or slightly verbally, and she would stop. He was very controlled by him.
Did he strike you as someone who was emotional?
Maybe he had emotions, but I sure never saw them. He was very, very much in control of his emotions.
Now, when you talk about someone who's in control of their emotions, is part of what you look at whether they're going to make decisions based on emotion or not?
Yes.
And what was your opinion in that
My
regard?
opinion, he made decisions based on rationality, cognition, not emotions. Very unemotional decision maker.
Was saving the marriage important to him?
Objection to speculation.
Sustain.
Did you discuss with him whether he wanted to stay in the marriage or wanted it to end?
Yes.
And what did he tell you he wanted in that regard?
He wanted the marriage to continue.
Why?
Did he say why?
Did he say why?
Yes, he did.
Okay, what did he say?
He said that divorce was out of the question, and that was ridiculous.
Why? What did he say he wanted out of the marriage? What did he want from Kitty Menendez?
He wanted a wife. And one of the conversations that we had was, what does that mean? And Kitty wanted to have a friendship as part of the marriage, and it was very clear to him that a friendship was something different from what a husband and wife had. What a wife was is somebody to be in the family and to take care of things.
Run the family?
Yeah, run the household, yes.
Did Kitty seem to want more out of the relationship than that?
Absolutely.
Was he willing to give her that?
Objection, conflict of regulation.
Sustained.
Did he indicate whether he was willing to give her
Did he
more
say
than
that?
Did he say?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes. Did he say whether he was willing to meet her needs with regard to the love relationship she wanted?
He said he was not willing to work at being a friend with her, but was willing to work at keeping the marriage as a husband and wife.
Was it a sort of a business arrangement he was describing?
Objection, conflict of regulation.
Sustained.
Was there any emotional content in the relationship he was describing?
For Kitty, yes. For him, maybe, but I didn't see it.
The last session you had, was it a joint session?
Yes, it was.
And did you indicate to them where you wanted to go with the therapy?
Yes, the immediate threat for suicide was over, and my recommendation to them was to begin to look at their relationship and the family relationships, to begin to build some trust between them, to build some cooperation between them, and then to look at their family relationships.
And when you talk about family relationships, would you be talking about the relationships between Kitty and Jose and their relationships with their children, with their two sons?
My rationale, yes, primary relationship would have been between husband and wife, and once that begins to improve, the relationship with the children would then follow, or could then follow. But the primary purpose for me was to work on their relationship as husband and wife.
Okay. But did you indicate to them that you wanted to explore their relationships with their children as well, when you talk about exploring family issues?
No, I don't think I did. I may have thought it. I don't remember if I said it or not.
Okay. So you think you just expressed in terms of exploring family issues?
I said family issues, yes.
Did they ever come back?
They never came back.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Any examination on behalf of Eric Menendez?
Dr. Cox, you've been in practice then since 1976?
Yes.
And you've treated a number of married couples, would that be fair to say?
Yes.
Dr. Cox, is it unusual for a woman who's been married for 24 years to be depressed over the fact that her husband's had an 8-year-long affair?
No.
And when someone is trying to recover from that particular kind of trauma, does the presence of the offending spouse within the household regenerate feelings of betrayal?
Yes.
So in other words, if you throw the guilty party out and recover, it's easier, isn't it, than if you continue in the relationship and wonder every day, is he going to betray me again? Wouldn't you agree?
If you thought you could rebuild your life by leaving, then yes. If you thought that your life would be over by leaving, then no.
And Mrs. Menendez very much wanted to stay in the marriage, is that correct?
Yes.
And from your assessment of Mr. Menendez, he, for his own reasons, wanted to continue in the marriage as well.
Yes.
Now, when you saw Mrs. Menendez, I believe you indicated there were 16 times total. The first session would have been on the 29th of October. So that would have been 7 years ago today, of 1986, correct?
Yes.
And that was the very first time you saw her?
Yes.
She was a referral from back east.
Right.
And how long were the sessions that you had with her?
1 hour.
Then I believe I think the last session was February the 3rd of 1987? Is that
Yes,
correct?
that sounds correct.
And 3 of the 16 sessions you had were joint sessions with Mr. Menendez, correct?
Mr. and Mrs. Menendez.
I'm sorry,
yes.
joint sessions with both of them, correct?
Yes.
And then you had 1 session with him alone?
Yes.
So you actually only had 12 sessions with Mrs. Menendez alone?
Yes.
All right, and that would have been then 12 hours alone with Mrs. Menendez?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you saw her, was she there voluntarily, or was she there because of a court order or some other kind of force? In other words, did she come in of her own free will, or was she forced to come in?
She was urged to come by her previous therapist in New Jersey.
Okay, but to your knowledge, he didn't have any means of forcing her?
No, she called and made the appointment on her own.
And when Mr. Menendez came to see you, did it appear to you that he walked in under his own free will, or was he in handcuffs or some other form of force?
He came because I called him the day before and said, your wife is talking about committing suicide and I'd like to see you.
And so he came?
Yes.
Right. And did he give you any problems about coming the next day? In other words, did he say
No, he was very cooperative.
Okay, so he didn't say, I've got a business meeting, I'm too busy, deal with it yourself.
No, he said, I've got a business meeting, can we change the time?
But he came in?
Yes.
Right. And that would have been, do you recall the first occasion that you saw Mr. Menendez?
Yes.
What date was it? Do you recall?
If you'd like me to look at my notes, I can tell
Certainly.
you.
Do you have the notes? I have them.
I have them. I am here.
Okay.
On November 6th, 1986.
All right, and I believe you indicated that the reason that you called him is because you were fearful. Is that correct? That Mrs. Menendez was in a very bad state.
I knew she was in a very bad state,
All right.
yes.
Did you get her permission to call him, or did you do it on your own?
I told her that because of her state that I was going to invite her husband to come. And then I called him and talked to him about my fear, yes, that she was suicidal and that she might indeed kill herself.
I believe you indicated that by February the 3rd of 1987, which was your last session, that you felt that the immediate threat of suicide had passed. Is
Yes.
that correct? Okay. I have to finish the question, otherwise the court reporter is going to have a very tough time. Okay, Dr. Cox? So about what time was it that you felt that the suicide threat had passed? If you recall, in between the 29th of October and the 3rd of February.
Objection to state testimony.
Rephrase the question.
You indicated by the 3rd of February of 1987 that you felt that the threat had passed.
Objection to state the testimony.
Overruled.
Would that be a fair summarization of your testimony?
I'd say that the threat had lessened. The threat came and went during the time that I had seen her, but it had lessened at that time.
Now, you talked about the fact that in discussing her suicide ideas with you, that her primary focus was not on her sons. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yes.
Okay. But as far as you know, she never did commit suicide, correct? Right?
Right.
And she, as long as you were treating her, she did not.
That's correct. She did not commit suicide.
So
I was treating her, yes.
And so she was talking to you about these things that she was thinking about, correct?
Yes.
Now, in regards to this, you said she was obsessive, and that one of the things you found her obsessive about was the affair of her husband, correct?
Yes.
As a family counselor, could you describe to me a healthy, normal response of a woman to finding out that her husband of 24 years has had an 8-year affair? What should a woman do that's normal and healthy?
There's no right answer to that question.
Now, were you aware of the fact that during the period of time that Mrs. Menendez saw you, you were aware she hadn't many friends, correct?
Right.
She had no family members she felt she could turn to aside from her husband.
Right.
Were you aware of whether or not she was employed outside of the home?
I believe she was not.
Did you have any indication that she had anything in her life, aside from her family, to give to affirm her sense of well-being?
Yes.
And what was that?
That was the remodeling of their house.
All right. And were you aware that at the time she had difficulty with the remodeling process?
Yes.
And frustrations over the remodeling process?
Yes.
All right. So aside from the remodeling of her house and her family, were you aware of any other activities or events that were life-affirming for Kitty Menendez during the period of time you treated her?
No.
This was a woman who was fairly alone. Would you say that would be correct?
Yes.
Now, do you remember referring to your notes of the 17th of December of 86? Could you look at those notes, please, for a moment?
I'm sorry, what is
December the 17th of 86.
Yes.
All right, let's wait till counsel gets hers. Do you see the first entry under those notes, which is that excited about Lyle arriving tonight?
Yes.
Do you recall that Mrs. Menendez, when she talked to you on the 17th of December of 86, was in fact excited about the return of her son from Princeton?
Yes.
Okay, so she did speak about her son, Lyle, at least once in positive terms during the period of time that you saw her?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Did she ever speak positively about her other son in your presence, if you recall?
I think so.
Now, are you aware of Mrs. Menendez's state of mind on August the 20th of 1989?
Do you understand the question?
1989, no.
Okay, Dr. Cox.
After I saw her...
the question on his argument?
Overruled your answer. You were in the process.
Would you repeat the question, please?
Dr. Cox, August the 20th, 1989 is the night that Kitty Menendez died.
Oh.
Do you know what she was thinking the night she died?
No.
Do you know if she was taking drugs that night?
No.
Do you know if she had anything to drink that night?
No.
In fact, the last time you ever saw her was on the 3rd of February of 1987. Is that correct?
I think so. That's correct.
And I believe you indicated that you talked to her during that session about working on some family issues and that you never saw her again.
Correct.
Were you made aware of the fact that she saw a different therapist shortly after leaving you?
Was I made aware of that?
Yeah, were you aware of the fact that in approximately March of 1987, Mrs. Menendez went to see a different therapist?
Yes.
Thank you. I have nothing.
Can you redirect?
Yes.
Dr. Cox, you indicated that when you thought that Kitty Menendez was an immediate suicide risk, you called Jose Menendez and asked to see him the next day.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And he had to change the time, but he did come in the next day. Is that correct?
Yes, he did.
Was he concerned about her killing herself?
Yes.
And if the threat wasn't death but merely her pain, did he seem to share an equal amount of concern?
Objection. Calls for conclusion and debate.
Sustain.
How did you determine that he was concerned about her killing herself?
Well, he responded immediately. He came in, and he was very cooperative.
Okay. Now, with regard to her non-life-threatening issues that were merely painful for her, did he demonstrate the same degree of concern?
No, he didn't. While there was an active threat, he was very concerned about eliminating that threat of suicide. And he asked my advice on what he should do about that. And we talked about staying with her and talking to her and being available to her. When that threat was lessening, then he became less available and was not so solicitous then.
Did he appear to share the same concerns that Kitty Menendez did with regard to public image?
Yes.
You were asked about the threat, the fact that the threat had lessened, but you referred to the fact that the suicide threat would come and go.
Yes.
Is that unusual? In patients, that they'd be suicidal, they'd get a little better, then they would get suicidal again. Is that a fairly common?
It's not unusual.
Excuse me. Mrs. Bozanich asked you if she had any life-affirming activities outside of her family. Do you remember that question?
Yes.
And you mentioned the remodeling of the house.
Yes.
Is one of the things that you suggest to depressed patients is that they get involved in other things, they
Yes.
exercise or...
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we talked about that, and I, in fact, called her physician, her medical physician, to ask him to discuss physical exercise with her, and he said that he had done that.
Now, Mrs. Menendez asked you about the family being life-affirming. Did Mrs. Menendez seem to look to her children as a source of life-affirming qualities?
I don't know.
When she described...
Have you finished your answer?
I don't know how to answer that question.
Let me ask you this. Who was the most important person in her life?
Jose.
And is that who she needed approval from?
Yes.
And love from?
Yes, absolutely.
Did her sons seem to be of anywhere near the equal importance to Jose in her life?
No.
In a proper opinion, can you describe?
Overall, you may complete your answer.
No, they're by far secondary to that, and they were important to her in that they provided the appearance of a family and success. And their success was important to her because it reflected on the success of the family.
Okay. But she didn't describe a close emotional relationship with either of her children?
No.
Is it typical of people who are depressed that they have difficulty in getting involved in emotional relationships, having the energy to make that kind of connection?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Is there a connection between being depressed and being emotionally unavailable?
Yes. Many people who are depressed withdraw from interpersonal relations, and they are unavailable to those around them. Yes.
And were you able to make any determination as to whether that was the condition with Mrs. Menendez and her son, that her own problems got in the way of having a relationship?
Yes. She was very withdrawn from her children.
And did you have the impression that this was a recent phenomena or one of long standing?
Sustained.
You indicated that that you believed she had been depressed for a long time.
Yes.
Would you expect that this emotional condition, this emotional unavailability would have been a component of that depression that she had experienced for a long time?
Yes.
And when you say a long time, are you talking about it was 6 months before she got to California, or are you suggesting that it went back much further?
Rephrase the question.
What is your definition of long standing?
In this case, it was all her life.
I have nothing further.
All right, anything else?
Dr. Cox, do people choose to be depressed?
It's an interesting question. Maybe some do.
Are there chemical components to depression as well, biological components to depression?
It can be, yes.
Anything else? Okay, thank you. You may step down. You're excused.
My name is Warden Hamlin Emery. WARDENHAMLINEMORY.
And sir, could you tell us your business or occupation?
I'm a psychiatric physician,
And how long have you been a physician?
about 25 years.
And have you always specialized in psychiatry?
Yes.
And have you practiced in the state of California for 25 years?
No, approximately 21 years.
And back in 1987, can you tell me where you were practicing medicine?
Thousand Oaks, California.
And in connection with your practice, did you have some duties at Westlake Community Hospital
Yes, I did.
in Westlake Village, California?
Yes.
And on or about November 8th, 1987, did you have occasion to attend to a patient by the name of Kitty Menendez?
I would need to see a copy of my consult in order to answer that question.
Could I approach you?
I did attend to Ms. Menendez, but I don't have a copy of my consult.
All right, you may approach.
Thank you. What you would mark as exhibit number 336 shares some medical records from Westlake Community Hospital.
Yes, this is the event in which I met Ms. Menendez.
And exhibit number 336 are the hospital records from Westlake Community Hospital. Is that correct?
Yes.
And showing you exhibit number 337. Are those some notes from your office which relate to follow-up visits which you had with Mrs. Menendez?
Yes, they are.
And when she was admitted to Westlake Community Hospital on November 8th, what was the admitting diagnosis according to the first page of those medical records?
Acute Xanax and alcohol ingestion, depression.
And did the medical records, were those records reviewed by you before you saw Mrs. Menendez?
I generally review everything before I interview a patient.
And where was she when you actually saw her?
She was in the intensive care unit of the hospital.
And was she alone or with someone else? I don't mean...
I do not recall whether her husband was there when I walked in. I do recall, while I was in the intensive care unit, I do recall his being present some of the time, and but whether he was present when I walked in or before I saw her, I don't remember.
And you were called in to do a psychiatric consultation with her after she'd been admitted for this?
That is correct.
Xanax?
That is correct.
All right. And did you write in the medical records your own observations and impressions and diagnosis?
That is correct.
Could you tell the jury what you wrote if you can read that portion of the records?
Shall I read
Yes.
what I wrote?
And then I'm going to ask you some questions about what you wrote.
Yes. Psychiatric consultation noon, 11/8/87. This 43-year-old female has a greater than 1 year history of dysthymic disorder and panic attacks for which she is being treated with imipramine 50 milligrams 3 times a day and Xanax 1 milligram 3 times a day and 1 milligram at bedtime. She took an excessive amount, 6, of Xanax, and again another 6 was not suicidal. She is alert, oriented, and cognitively intact. She is not self-harmful, and there is no reason to keep her in the hospital. She is having breakthrough anxiety due to low tricyclic antidepressant level impression on axis 1 dysthymic disorder, on axis 1 panic disorder, axis 2 suspect personality disorder. Suggest she should try sine qua non amitriptyline, and the Xanax dose should be tapered, or switch her to Klonopin, which has a longer half-life.
All right, your diagnostic impressions were, first of all, how do you say that word?
Dysthymic.
Thank you. What is that disorder?
That's a phenomenologically, or using a description of behavior, which is the entire diagnostic system on which psychiatry and psychology are based. Dysthymic disorder is considered a moderate level of depression.
And you also had an impression of panic disorder.
Yes.
Which tell the jury what that is.
Panic disorder is an anxiety disorder in which a person has, for greater than 2 weeks, episodes of sudden onset of fear, a sense of impending doom, possibly a feeling that they might die, and symptoms such as tachycardia.
What is that?
Rapid pulse rate, rapid heartbeat, some gastrointestinal symptoms, basically the vegetative symptoms which are ordinarily controlled become or feel not out of control, so that one is not able possibly to sleep. One has rapid pulse intermittently. One feels that one is going to die, have a heart attack and die.
And you also had the impression or wrote suspect personality disorder. Could you tell the jury what a personality disorder is and why you suspected that?
My usage of that term at that time would be the same as my usage of it now. A personality trait disturbance or a personality disturbance in our nomenclature indicates a person's behavior is characteristically fixed and is in a long-standing way either excessively odd, excessively angry, or excessively fear-ridden. So we have the odd, the angry, and the fearful. And we use the term personality trait disturbance or personality disorder, or I use it, to denote a person whose characteristic behaviors, and those behaviors obviously are a result of the way they think, their priorities, their emotional coping styles, their philosophy, etc. The characteristic behaviors is rigid or fixed and does not change or adapt when the situation may require more rational approach to a circumstance that is different and therefore requires some sort of alternative behavior.
All right. And why in this particular case did you have an impression of a suspect personality disorder?
I was concerned about that because I noted when I took the history that Mrs. Menendez was trivializing her circumstance, her overdose, or it appeared to me that she was. I noted that during some of the time while I was there, while I was writing notes, while I was talking to the nurses, that she seemed quite frightened. There was an interaction between her and her husband, which resulted in both of them wanting her to leave as soon as possible. They did sign out against medical advice. There was a sense, in my opinion, that she was not being honest. And when I find that a person is making me feel that they're not candid and forthright, I have a concern about character disorder or personality disorder, and so I wrote it on the Axis 2.
And was there also an indication in the medical records that Mrs. Menendez was trying to sneak some pills above and beyond what was prescribed for her? On the
Yes. There is a note here on the emergency room form. Do not give patient her own medications, her own meds. Attempts to put more pills in the mouth when I was not looking.
And that's a nurse's note?
That is a nurse's note. The time was, I believe it was like 1:37 a.m. in the morning, something like that.
You also wrote in the notes that she is having breakthrough anxiety due to low tricyclic antidepressant level. What does that mean?
That was a supposition on my part. I had never met this person. My task there was to do a focused consultation, not to get the person's entire life. One cannot do that in a focused consultation. And my purpose was to make some sort of triage recommendation, triage decisions and recommendations. And actually, I did recommend to her and her husband that she be transferred to a psychiatric unit for several days for purpose of stabilization. The notice of my document about breakthrough was based on the notion that she might be one of these people who, if she had been prescribed more effective antidepressant medication, would not be having persistent panic attacks or anxiety attacks. We know that people with panic disorder have much in common with more characteristically classically depressed people, and therefore if we treat the person adequately with an antidepressant, some of patients with panic disorder do better, and their panic and anxiety diminishes or lysis. It terminates, it ends, it disappears.
Now, you said, doctor, that she checked out against medical advice. Is that correct?
Neither she nor he were willing to follow medical advice, and Dr. Masterson, his dictated workup here indicates, I believe, that she signed out against medical advice. Let me see if I can find it. I think we're missing a page, but I do recall that.
All right. And is there also an indication in the records that Mr. Menendez was demanding to see Dr. Masterson?
Dr. McCall's hearsay.
I will participate with you in a pursuit of that. Can you help me? Yes, patient and husband angry about, I cannot read that word, state, quote, "Who is this Dr. Masterson, question mark. He is not our physician. If there is a form I need to sign, give it to me, we're leaving," unquote. AMA form signed by patient and husband. Patient dressed and left ICU with husband.
So she did check out against medical advice with the participation of her husband.
That is correct.
All right. Now, did you continue to see Mrs. Menendez after the date of November 8th,
Yes,
1987?
I did. She requested that I follow the medications which had been prescribed by a previous professional, and I did so. For approximately, I think, about 8 months, 9 months.
When was the last time you saw her?
My last note here is 10/3/88.
And is it true that during the period from November of 87 to October of 88, you were prescribing medication for her?
That is correct.
And did the medication dosage increase over that period of time?
Yes.
And what was the medication you were prescribing for her?
I was giving her Xanax, well, 0.5 milligram 3 times a day and 2 milligrams at bedtime in the beginning. So that would be 3.5 milligrams of Xanax a day, and tofranil or imipramine, 50 milligrams 4 times a day. And those were the 2 agents that I believe that she had been using when I first saw her in the hospital. And then, over the course of time, I increased the imipramine or tofranil, it's the same medicine, up to 300 milligrams and 375 milligrams a day in order to, again, try to achieve a therapeutic level of the imipramine, the antidepressant.
Could you indicate to the juries whether that's a high dosage that you ended up with, a medium, low dosage?
That's a much higher dosage than the average person requires, and yet I had a therapeutic level in the blood at that dosage. So it's not how much you take, it's how much you absorb.
And could you explain to the juries just in general what those drugs do when you take those drugs at those dosages, in terms of the effects that they have on a person?
They have different effects on different people. For me to go into a discourse about what these drugs do, in general, the imipramine raises 2 neurotransmitters, mainly in the central nervous system, that have to do with mood, serotonin and norepinephrine. Has to do with mood, maintenance of mood. And the Xanax is a so-called minor tranquilizer, which is an inhibitory medicine and inhibits and diminishes the fight-flight response, the emergency fight-flight response that is at the basis of anxiety.
And are there any side effects to those drugs?
They may be.
Such as?
If they're excessively prescribed, or first of all, if one has some idiosyncratic or unusual side effect, one could have an allergy to the medications, be unable to take them. One can become increasingly violent as a result of benzodiazepine use, increasingly labile. One can have
what does that mean, labile?
Shifting, an incontinence of mood. Just like you can be incontinent of urine, you can be incontinent of mood. So you get lability, you're up and down. There can be a whole host of side effects. You can become groggy, you can be excessively sedated, tunted on either of these medications.
Right, Doctor, you saw Mrs. Menendez from November of 87 to October of 88, and during that time period, could you just in general indicate how long the sessions were when you saw her and just the regularity of the visits?
My notes would show that I saw her on 11/11/87, again a week later, 11/20/87, in December, twice, in January, twice, February, and then March, and then not again until October of '88.
And during those sessions, were you attempting to find out the source of Mrs. Menendez's problems?
I was not functioning as a therapist. I was functioning as a psychiatrist, and I was just doing the medical aspect of her treatment. I met with her approximately 15 to 20 minutes each time. And that was after an initial hour meeting with her on 11/11/87, and that was after an hour with her, or maybe longer, hour and 20 minutes, hour and 30 minutes in the intensive care unit the first time. What struck me about this person was that she seemed inordinately more distressed than many people I usually see with these diagnoses. I could never understand her level of professed distress. Most people with it.
All right, your next question.
Doctor, the diagnosis which you originally gave, that is the panic disorder, suspect personality disorder, those were and the other disorder, which I cannot pronounce, those were your initial impressions in this instance, correct?
Along with suspect some character trait or character pathology, yes.
All right. And did your impressions change over time as you continued to see Mrs. Menendez?
No.
And could you tell the juries why you maintained the diagnostic impressions which you originally had when you first saw her?
The question is vague as to what you mean by why.
Explain to the juries why you formed and maintained the diagnostic impressions which you did form.
We've already said why he formed the initial impressions. Are you asking, did anything occur that caused him to change those initial
I'm asking
impressions?
why, let me rephrase the question. Doctor, by the end of your consultation with Mrs. Menendez in November of 1988, you held the same opinions as to her diagnosis as you did when you first saw her, correct?
Yes, I did.
And could you explain why you maintain the same diagnosis after seeing her for the period of time that you saw her?
Understand the question?
I don't know what I'm now supposed to do.
Okay, then you'll have to ask a different question.
Well, are you, doctor, when you say you don't know what you're supposed to do you understand the question?
I can answer your question, but I'm hearing that I shouldn't answer your question.
Right.
No, I asked you a question. The question was, do you understand the question?
Yes.
Okay.
You can answer.
Thank you. Don't want to do anything I'm not supposed to. I queried Mrs. Menendez on each occasion about why she seemed to be in persistent distress. And I never received an answer that made me able to explain her level of distress. I remember on one occasion talking to her therapist, who also could not give me any explanation. And again, it was my opinion that here was a woman who apparently had some kind of marital problem, or which I thought that was the difficulty, but was unable to extricate herself from it, and unable to shift and do what apparently needed to be done in order for her to improve her circumstance. And her lack of ability to make appropriate alterations with the 1+ history that I had prior to her coming to me, and this was her own admission, and then the additional time she spent with my medicating her, that is the reason why I would still aver that I suspected personality trait or personality disorder.
Okay, one moment. Did Mrs. Menendez also have an inability to discuss with you the nature of her problems?
Yes.
Did she appear to you to be secretive during the time that you consulted with her?
Objection improper. Can you give him the foundation?
Sustained the answer, stricken.
Was Mrs. Menendez forthcoming with the details concerning the nature of her problem when you consulted with her?
No,
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation.
All right, the answer no will stand.
Thank you. And did you make attempts to draw her out as to the nature of her problems?
yes,
Is that what you do as a psychiatrist?
sometimes.
And doctor, are you familiar with a drug called Prozac?
Yes.
Could you tell the juries what that drug does, just in general?
Prozac is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or called SSRI as an acronym. It therefore raises the serotonin in the interneural synaptic cleft, or the space between neurons. It raises serotonin. Therefore,
What is its purpose? Just generally, what does it do?
it's an antidepressant.
Okay.
Thank you. That's all I have.
All right, cross-examination.
Dr. Emery, then the first time you saw Mrs. Menendez, you took a history from her that took you about an hour and 20 minutes, I think was your testimony. Is that correct?
I'm sure I was there between an hour and 20 minutes. I'm not sure exactly how long. Usually those consultations require that.
All right, and that was in an emergency room setting, is that correct?
No.
Well, it was certainly after she'd been admitted to the emergency
It
room.
was in the ICU, intensive care unit.
And then I believe you indicated that you saw her again on the 11th of November of 1987 for approximately 1 hour, is that correct? And I think you might need to refer to your notes of her patient visits.
I don't remember the amount of time precisely, but generally when a patient comes in to my office for the first time, I generally see them for approximately an hour's time.
I believe you indicated that after that first session on the 11th of November, you saw her again on November the 20th of 87, 2 times in December of 87, 2 times in January of 88, I believe, but I'm not sure that you indicated 1 time in February,
Yes.
1 time in March,
Yes.
and 1 time in October of 88.
Yes.
And those particular sessions after the first one were for a period of time of about 15 minutes, is that correct?
Correct.
And you were not there to provide her therapy, were you? You were there to monitor and maintain her dosage of medication in conjunction with psychological therapy she was receiving from Dr. Summerfield, correct?
Correct.
And so you would have seen her, aside from the first 2 times that you ever saw her, approximately 8 times for 15 minutes, correct?
Approximately.
Now, do you remember being interviewed by a defense investigator in this case regarding your impressions of Mrs. Menendez? A defense investigator named Cynthia Erderly?
Yes.
And did you indicate to Ms. Erderly that Kitty was not truly a mentally ill person, such as psychotic or neurotic, but she was anguished? Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like something you said about Mrs. Menendez?
I think I've been misquoted.
All right, may I approach, please, and show him the report?
Yes.
Shall I? Dr. Emery, the pain portion of the investigation. Well, do you remember, you don't remember
No.
saying anything of this sort?
I remember the phone interview, but this is not an accurate representation of what I said.
Now, did you find that Mrs. Menendez was in fact mentally ill?
That is too nonspecific a term. I don't know what it means.
All right, well, I don't either. So, did you diagnose her as being psychotic?
No.
Did you diagnose her as being having multiple personality disorder or anything of that
No.
sort?
She had 2 types of phenomena, in my opinion.
And those are the phenomena you've already described for Mr. Bird on your direct examination, correct?
Yes, one level is a neurotic level of dysfunction, which is the dysthymic disorder and the panic disorder. The second was my concern and my suspicion that there was a personality trait or personality disorder.
Now, I believe you indicated that over a period of time that you saw her that you prescribed Xanax for her. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Xanax is is that an antidepressant or is that just, what is the Xanax specifically?
It's a GABA-aminobutyric acid inhibitor.
Okay.
So it functions as an anxiolytic. It's an anti-anxiety medicine.
What's the smallest dosage of Xanax that a person can take?
The present nomenclature, the present denomination is 0.25 milligram.
And that is the smallest dosage?
Yes.
All right. And do people build up a tolerance to Xanax?
Those for whom it is appropriately indicated, generally not.
Is Xanax the type of drug that one can cease taking without being weaned off of it?
No.
Okay, and when someone is weaned off of Xanax, in what dosages is one weaned off of it?
One should generally be very slow in weaning a person from any kind of benzodiazepine such as Xanax. You should let yourself take about a fourth of the time that the person was on it in order to wean them off of it.
Now, when you interviewed Mrs. Menendez on the 7th of November of 1987, did you consult with her treating psychologist before rendering your diagnosis of her?
No.
Okay, so this was just all done from your observations of her and your questions of her in that hour to hour and 20 minutes first impression, correct?
Yes.
And do you have any idea of what kind of drugs, if any, Mrs. Menendez was taking on August the 20th of 1989? The day that she died?
No.
And you hadn't seen her since October of 1988, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so you have no idea of what, if any, kind of medication she was on during the whole year of 1989, is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Anything else?
Dr. Emery, you did not consult with Dr. Summerfield before you wrote your initial impressions. At some point in time, did you consult with him?
Yes, there was a phone call that I either made to him or he made to me, and I do not remember which of those two. But there was a phone call in which we discussed her.
And did you specifically discuss Kitty Menendez's secretiveness in terms of her not being able to explain her problems to you or to Dr. Summerfield?
Objection. Calls for hearsay beyond the scope of cross.
Sustained.
This is for the non-hearsay purpose of supporting his diagnosis.
Objection sustained. It's beyond the scope.
Doctor, you said that Kitty Menendez was not psychotic, correct?
Correct.
Is it true that truly mentally ill people, that is, psychotics, don't know why they feel the way that they do?
Objection.
They can't explain it?
Objection. Irrelevant.
Sustained.
Was Kitty Menendez able to explain to you why she felt the way that she did?
Objection beyond the scope.
Overruled.
You can answer.
She gave me her explanations to the best of her ability, but I was not able to comprehend because they were couched in physical complaint terms without sufficient data relevant to her life. So I never felt that I really had obtained the information necessary to really understand her. And that I would say someone is, if you want to use the word secretive, or the information just wasn't there. You could probably use other adjectives to explain how one felt. When you're not getting the information that you're seeking, there could be various reasons for it. The woman never was able to articulate, other than there was some problem with her husband. I'm certain that I asked specific questions. I tried to get her to give me more data, but I never got it.
Thank you very much, Doctor. That's all I have.
All right, anything else? All right, thank you. You may step down. You're excused.
Students, pediatric residents, family practice residents, OBGYN residents, and in our hospital, as well as physicians in the community about sexual abuse and physical abuse.
And can you tell me what the hospital scan team does? What its function is?
The scan team's function is to review problematic cases of child abuse and neglect, problematic as far as diagnosis or intervention and treatment, and to manage the paperwork for all cases, whether they be problematic or not.
Okay, so that, if I'm correct, a child who is suspected or who has reported being abused sexually is brought to the hospital for examination by members of your team. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then you or members of your team will undertake a physical examination of a child to see whether or not there are physical findings that support the reports of abuse.
That's correct.
Now, aside from your work at the King Group Medical Center with the hospital scan team, do you hold any positions on committees concerned with sexual abuse of children?
Well, I'm a member of the California Association of Professionals, CAPSAC. I can't remember the full name of the organization. The eponym is CAPSAC. I'm a member of the LA County Sexual Abuse Examiners Group that meets every other month to review cases review the physical findings in child abuse and neglect.
Do you work with the coroner's office in any capacity?
I was one of the founding members of the Coroner's Death Review Committee, but I wrote the original protocols for review of child death in Los Angeles County, but I'm not currently active in that committee.
Okay, but you have served on that committee in the past.
That's correct.
And are you also a member of the AAP Child Abuse Committee?
Yes, I'm a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics Child Abuse Committee.
Now, have you testified on prior occasions, Dr. English, as an expert in the area of the physical effects of sexual abuse of children?
Yes, I have.
And approximately how many times have you testified in court as an expert?
Between 100 and 150 times.
And have you testified as an expert in both criminal and civil cases?
Yes.
Directing your attention to the criminal cases that you've testified in, what percentage of those cases have you appeared as a witness for the prosecution?
I would say about 90% of those cases.
So in the cases in which you appear as an expert witness for the prosecution, are those cases in which a defendant, is being charged with sexually abusing children or a child?
Generally, yes.
Okay, and generally, does the prosecution call you as a witness to testify as to any physical findings concerning the crimes that have been charged against the defendant?
Yes.
Have you testified from time to time for the defense in criminal cases?
Yes.
And approximately what percentage of the times that you've testified in criminal cases have you testified as a witness for the defense?
In criminal cases, approximately 10%.
Now, you've told us that part of your job is to examine children who report sexual abuse to see if there are physical findings consistent with their reports. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you also examine children who report to be the victims of sodomy?
Yes.
Okay. And approximately, if you can tell us, how many children do you examine a year who report that they have been sodomized?
Between 75 and 100 personally.
And aside from those that you examine personally, do you supervise or review medical records of other children who report having been victims of sodomy?
Yes.
And approximately how many cases like that do you review but not personally?
Approximately the same number are reviewed.
Okay, now when you say that you examine 75 to 100 children a year, what age group are you talking about?
The vast majority of the individuals I examine are under the age of 12 with allegations of sodomy.
And in addition to your personal experience, are you also familiar with the literature regarding the physical effects of sodomy on children?
Yes.
Now, Dr. English, is the timing of an examination for the physical findings of a child who reports sodomy a significant factor? That is when you see the child important?
Yes.
Okay, and why is it important?
It's important because the likelihood of finding physical changes drops off dramatically in child sexual abuse cases that involve sodomy. Of the number that I see each year that have positive physical findings, I would say a good 30% of those I have examined within 2 or 3 days of the event. So, and in view of the fact that there's a very small percentage that have any physical changes, I would, in the majority of children I see at some significant distance from the event, time-wise, I would have to conclude that the timing is very important, and the closer proximity to the actual event, the more likely there are to be physical changes.
Okay, and when you say closer proximity, do you mean within days, months?
I mean within days. I mean within a few days.
Okay, you mentioned a figure of 30% of the children that you examine within a period of days of the event.
Yes, of the total number of children that I examine that have histories of sodomy, approximately between 5 and 10% have physical changes. Now, and if you look at the total percentage of children, if you look at the total number of sodomy cases I see, the vast majority, on the order of 90% plus of those children, more like 95% of those children, are seen at some time significantly removed from the alleged events, on the order of weeks to months. In the group that are positive, about 30% of those have been seen within a very few days of the alleged event. So I have to conclude that the time relationships are extremely important.
Okay, and why is that? Is there something about the anus that makes this timing important?
Well, there's something about any area that's injured, but the anus in particular. First of all, the anus passes large objects as a routine thing in the course of its functions. Secondly, it has mucous membranes that heal very quickly on the inner part of the anus, so that the combination of the fact that it commonly sustains trauma passing stool, and the fact that it heals so quickly means that you're not likely to see any physical changes. It's a very pliable organ. It can pass a substantially large object without sustaining that much trauma, and the trauma heals very quickly.
Dr. English, have you had available to read any portions of Eric Menendez's testimony concerning the sexual abuse that he suffered, or acts of sodomy actually, by his father that occurred from time to time between the ages of 12 and 18 years?
I have.
Okay. And did you also conduct a physical examination of Eric Menendez for evidence of any anal scarring or changes or findings that would be abnormal or consistent with having been sodomized from time to time by his father between the age of 12 and 18 years?
I did.
And what did you see?
I saw no physical changes that could be identified as indicative of prior sodomy.
And when did you conduct this examination?
It was in August of 1993. I don't remember the specific date.
And this was at the Los Angeles County Jail?
Yes, it was.
Were your findings upon a physical examination of Eric Menendez consistent with what you would expect to see given your experience with examining children who have been victims of sodomy?
Yes.
Okay, so in other words, you wouldn't expect to see significant changes to his anal area, scarring, or anything like that, given the history that was reported in Eric's testimony?
That's correct.
Let me ask you, Dr. English, if you were to have seen Eric Menendez within 3 days of the occasion on which his father first sodomized him at age 12, might you have been able to see some physical findings of that act?
I think might is a fair statement. Would have been more likely.
Okay.
Yes.
You first examined Eric Menendez in 1993. Would it have made any difference if you had examined him, say, in 1989? That is, would it be more likely that you would see evidence at that point in
It
time?
probably wouldn't have made any difference.
Dr. English, are you familiar with something called a colposcope?
Yes.
What is a colposcope?
A colposcope is a medical instrument originally developed for examining the female cervix that has a light attached and a magnification system. And many colposcopes also have cameras attached for recording the findings. They've been used for the better part of the last decade for evaluation of child sex abuse cases. They are principally used for the evaluation of the genital findings in female children. They have been used for the evaluation of anal findings, but with much less success. And I believe that most people would consider using them, but they don't seem to be as valuable in the evaluation of anal findings, other than that they provide a magnification and they provide an opportunity to record the event if they have a camera attached.
Okay.
And virtually everybody that uses them for evaluation of child sexual abuse, of course, does have a camera attached.
And is that an instrument that you felt it necessary to use in examining Eric Menendez in this case?
No, I didn't believe it was necessary.
Dr. English, have you had access to certain medical records of Eric Menendez?
Yes.
And do those medical records show that from time to time, as a child, he was taken to the doctor for various and sundry reasons?
Yes.
Based on your review of those medical records, does it appear to you that he was ever given as a child any examination of a type that would be likely to disclose evidence of anal scarring or changes caused by acts of sodomy?
No.
Back in the 1970s, would you say that the medical community was as aware of or as sensitive to the problems of sexual abuse of children as they are now?
No.
Did you see any indication in Eric Menendez's medical records of an injury to his throat area?
Yes.
Okay. May I approach Your Honor with Exhibit 299?
Yes.
Thank you. A document that's been marked Exhibit 299 appears to be some typewritten medical records about Eric Menendez. Does that document indicate that there was an injury to the throat of Eric Menendez sometime in 1977?
Yes.
Okay, and what specifically does the medical record indicate was injured?
The direct quote is hurt posterior pharynx, uvula, and soft palate. Seen in emergency room, Princeton Medical Center.
Okay.
Healing well, symptomatic treatment. Actually, it was seen the day before. This is the follow-up note.
Okay. Now, is there is the report of injury in that medical record that's before you as 299? Is that consistent with could that be caused by child sexual abuse in your opinion?
Yes, could be.
And what do you have any opinion as to what type of child sexual abuse could have resulted in that particular complaint?
Oral copulation.
Okay. In examining Eric Menendez in August of 1993, did you notice that he had a scar on his left inner knee?
Yes.
And did that appear to be a wound that had been unsutured, that is, it had gone untreated, unstitched?
Yes.
May I just have a moment, Your Honor? Yes. Thank you. I have nothing further this time.
Any examination on behalf of Lyle Menendez?
Doctor, do I understand you to say that of the roughly 75 to 100 cases that you personally see annually, that only 5 to 10% of those cases show any physical findings? Those are all cases involving allegations of sodomy?
That's correct.
And how do you know that that group of cases in any one year are, in fact, cases involving sodomy, as opposed to someone who's just making allegations?
That's a good question. A percentage of those cases that have independent corroboration. I've not personally been involved with any that involved independent corroboration in the form of videotapes, but independent confessions on the part of the perpetrators occur in maybe 5% of cases. And in those cases, the numbers aren't any different in terms of findings. If you are to look at the credibility of the history based on knowledge of child development, the description of the child, I'm talking about cases in which that credibility appears to be present. So I'm essentially going on the basis of the report of the child in the majority of cases.
And in other words, this 75 to 100 cases are cases where you personally are making some determination that these appear to be credible reports of sodomy.
That's correct.
And in a certain group of those cases, those credible reports are corroborated by other information, such as confessions of perpetrators.
Correct.
And even in those cases, you're saying that you will have someone who has confessed to committing sodomy and that you will not have physical findings?
That's correct.
Do some of those cases involve fully grown adult males perpetrating the crime of sodomy against youngsters approximately 6 to 8 years of age?
Approximately 90%, 90-95% of the cases involve fully adult males. A small percentage are young teenagers, but the majority are adult males.
Right. And you said you personally have not seen a case involving a videotape. Have you heard of such cases? That is, cases where you have a videotape of someone committing the crime of sodomy where there is no physical finding?
Yes.
Now, did you conduct a similar examination on Lyle Menendez as you testified to with respect to Eric Menendez?
I did.
Was that examination conducted in August of 1993?
Yes.
What did you do in the examination?
I did a complete physical examination, including an anal inspection and digital examination.
And can you tell me the results of your examination with respect to Lyle Menendez?
There were no physical findings on the anal exam.
Were there any physical findings at all on physical inspection, not only of the anal area, but any place else on the body?
There were a few non-specific scars, and there was one scar on the lower lip that appeared to be a non-sutured scar.
Could that scar on the lower lip have been caused by someone punching someone in the face?
That is what Lyle related to me as the cause of the scar, yes.
And did you also take a medical history from him concerning sexual abuse by his father?
Yes.
Did you also review the testimony that he gave here in this trial concerning the sexual abuse that had been perpetrated on him by his father when he was approximately 6 to 8 years of age?
Yes, I did.
Was the testimony that he gave to the jury consistent with what he told you about the sexual abuse?
Yes.
And does the absence of trauma to his anal area indicate to you that the absence of those findings is inconsistent with his testimony? Is there an inconsistency between the absence of findings of anal trauma and his testimony and his report to you of a history of sexual abuse?
No, there's no inconsistency.
You talk about unsutured. Could you describe what you mean by that?
Well, I misspoke. It was an unsutured scar. It was a scar that appeared never to have been from a laceration that had never been sutured.
Did you, in addition to examining Lyle Menendez, also review his medical records?
Yes.
And did those medical records span a period from approximately March of 1971 to July of 1989?
Yes.
Was there anything remarkable about the medical history in terms of findings that were made by other physicians that you reviewed?
Well, there were a significant number of physician visits.
Right. Let me ask
a significant number of records of physician visits, I should say.
Did you see in the medical history certain injuries which had been treated by other physicians?
Yes.
For instance, was there an indication that when Lyle Menendez was 3 years old on March 9, 1971, that he had a injury sutured as a result of a dog biting him in the face?
Yes, I recall that, I believe.
And do you recall in 1974 there was a report of an injury, hematoma to the left side of his face?
Yes.
And in the same year, 1974, when he was 6 years old, a report of an injury of a 1.5 laceration to his right eyebrow?
Yes.
Was there also a history that he had what's called an epigastric hernia when he was 7 years old?
Yes.
What is that?
It's a failure of the muscles of the abdomen to be completely contiguous, so that a small part of bowel comes out between the muscles, essentially.
Is there any indication that that specific injury is caused by sexual abuse, or can it be caused by a wide variety of things?
It's congenital. One is born with it, and the degree to which it becomes a problem determines when it needs surgical attention. But it's a congenital formation of the bowel and the abdominal wall.
And did the medical history also include a history in August of 1976 of a speech articulation disorder and below grade level school performance?
Yes.
Did it also include an entry on August 4th, 1978 that he grinds his teeth?
I don't remember the exact date of the teeth grinding, but I remember the teeth grinding.
And was there also a report in October 28, 1976 of stomach pains?
Yes.
And on March 7, 1977, global headaches?
Yes.
What does that mean, global headaches?
I'm not sure.
Right. Was there also various reports from 1979 to 1989 of complaints of headaches?
Yes.
Would any doctor looking at that full range of symptoms been alerted to the possibility of sexual abuse, just looking at this medical history, if it was all presented at once?
Rephrase the question.
Would a doctor who was presented with the physical symptoms, which I just reviewed for you, have been clued in any way to the possibility of sexual assault based solely on those symptoms?
Are you asking if they were all presented at one time in
Right.
one patient at the same time?
Yes.
Do you understand the question?
Yes.
Oh, objection overruled.
I certainly don't believe that I'm not aware of any physicians in the 1970s that would have even thought of a diagnosis of child sexual abuse. The same symptom constellation today, probably a small percentage of physicians would make that connection, even though many of those things are symptoms that are seen in children that are sexually abused over a long period of time. I don't believe that the average physician, or even the average pediatrician, would make that connection.
And even today, with the advanced state of knowledge that there is with the examination of child sexual assault victims, do physicians miss possibilities that a child has been sexually abused?
Certainly.
And back when some of these examinations were made, that is the examinations made by physicians who examined Lyle Menendez, for instance, in 1971 when he was 3 years old, or 1974 when he was 6 years old, was the state of knowledge such at that point that it was even a higher likelihood that a physician may have missed indications of child abuse?
Absolutely.
That's all I have. Thank you. Excuse me. Why did you make the physical examination in this case? The possibility of finding physical findings was so small after so many years.
I was asked to by the defense attorney that asked me to consider examining records in the first place.
And was it your understanding that Dr. Hart had requested that report be done, or that examination be done?
No, I recall only the conversation with Paul Menendez regarding whether to do the examination or not.
Paul Menendez is a consultant on the case.
That's correct.
And did I inform you that Dr. Hart testified that he was the one who originated
Yes,
the
you did
request?
inform me, but I wasn't aware of it at the time.
And were you also informed that Dr. Hart is a psychologist, not a physician?
Yes.
And when you were asked to do the examination, did you indicate to anybody that the chances of finding physical evidence of anal penetration on someone like Lyle Menendez, who was reporting a history of sexual abuse at age 6 to 8 after approximately 20 years, was virtually zero?
Objection, please.
Overruled.
Yes, I did. I've lost the question.
Well, let's withdraw the answer and start striking. Okay?
Excuse me, Your Honor.
The answer is stricken. Let's rephrase the question.
Did anyone did you indicate to anyone when you were asked to make this examination that the possibility of finding physical evidence of anal penetration on Lyle Menendez, who had given a history of sodomy between the ages of 6 and 8, was virtually nil after approximately 20 years?
Yes, I indicated that I thought it was extremely unlikely.
And you were told to nevertheless go ahead and make the examination?
Well, he said that he would get back to me about it, and I was quite frankly surprised, considering the degree to which I had said that I didn't believe there would be any physical changes, that he did ask me to do the examination.
And did you tell him the same thing with respect to Eric Menendez?
Yes.
Even though the history of Eric Menendez was more recent in nature?
Yes.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Cross-examination?
Dr. English, I believe you indicated that 90% of the cases where you testify regarding child sexual abuse, you testify for the prosecution, correct?
That's correct.
And in those 90% of the cases, are you testifying to physical findings of child sexual abuse?
Certainly the vast majority of the cases, yes.
Okay. You indicated that of the 5 to 10% of the victims who do have physical findings of sodomy, that 30% of those are seen within days of the claim of the act, correct?
That's correct.
What about the other 70%?
Well, 70%, the other 70% are seen at some more remote time and have scars in the anal area indicative of probable sodomy.
Does anal tearing always accompany sodomy? In your experience?
In my experience, it hardly ever accompanies sodomy.
Pardon me?
In my experience, anal tearing hardly ever accompanies sodomy. I guess I'm stuck on the question because one would assume that with a hard stool or an active sodomy that there's probably micro tearing within the anal verge that we wouldn't appreciate other than by redness if we examine somebody immediately after an extremely hard stool or an episode of sodomy. I can only respond to what I see, which is very seldom any indication of anything. What is required for me to see anything is, of course, a substantial tear of the anus and a tear that is external to the anal verge, so that it would be caused by sodomy rather than by some other physiologic event, such as a very difficult to pass stool.
If you find anal scarring in a victim that you're examining, can that be diagnostic of sodomy?
If the location of the scarring and the size of the scarring is appropriate to that diagnosis, yes, it can be.
Does the frequency of the sodomy affect the possibility of finding anal scarring?
I think that's a difficult question to reliably answer. In those cases in which we've been able to appreciate physical changes, it appears as if one episode of sodomy caused it. In other words, there was one vigorous episode of sodomy that appeared to have caused a laceration. One could speculate that as the number of episodes increase, then the likelihood of there being an episode that caused tearing would increase. On the other hand, if the number of episodes increase and they're in some temporal relationship to one another, then the likelihood of scarring would diminish during that period because of that during that period the sphincter would presumably become a little less reactive. So that I think it's a very difficult question to reliably answer, and I don't believe anybody has any reliable scientific knowledge of.
So you're aware of no studies that make that correlation?
That's correct.
Now, you indicated that you saw in the medical records of Eric Menendez a throat injury that you've described for the jury in your direct examination.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, have you ever worked in an emergency room?
Yes.
And aside from the fact that this could have been caused by oral copulation, are there other things that cause injuries to children's mouths and throats?
Certainly.
What, such as?
Falls on objects.
Falls?
Falls, bicycle falls. There are other things that cause such injuries.
Do children have a habit of putting things in their mouths that don't belong there?
Yes.
Toys and things like that?
Yes.
And from the medical records you have, are you able to determine whether this is a burn or a bruise or a laceration, the injury that's described in the medical record, Exhibit 299?
No, it's a non-specific description.
All right, so without a more specific description, would that lessen the certainty of your diagnosis of what it could be?
Oh, I didn't mean to express any certainty that I thought it was from oral copulation, only that's one of the things that could have caused it.
And if in fact the injury was a burn, that would be contraindicative of oral copulation, but rather maybe swallowing hot liquid, correct?
Well, a burn would, I think that of the choices you could have made, a burn would be the least likely to give the findings involved because there was no indication of any burn to the rest of the mouth. So it seems unlikely a child would swallow liquid and would only burn the posterior pharynx and wouldn't bother the tongue or the lips or anything else. But there are certainly plenty of other childhood accidents that could cause injury to the posterior pharynx and spare the tongue or the lips.
Do children sometimes swallow things that cause injury to those portions of their throat?
They sometimes swallow lye. Young children do. That cause injuries there, yes. But swallowing something, I think, would be unlikely to cause an injury there. Be more likely to fall.
Of the cases where you have made determinations, the 75 to 100 cases per year where you make these determinations, you have no scientific way of correlating the physical findings with the truthfulness of the children who claim to be sodomized, correct?
That's scientific meaning.
Well, there's no machine.
No, there's no machine.
Okay. And so when you are doing these examinations, you talk to the children, correct?
That's correct.
You examine police reports if they're available?
That's correct.
What else do you do in order to verify the truthfulness of the claim of child abuse?
That's the limit of what I have available.
Right,
to make the determination.
So when you are making examination
I'm sorry. I occasionally have eyewitness reports as well.
Which would be
But
part
still,
of the police reports?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever done a correlation between the percentage of children who have physical findings for sodomy and the percentage of those cases which are actually found to be true? You understand my question?
I think so.
Do you want me to do it again?
Please.
Okay. If let's say you examine 100 cases a year for purposes of percentages, and you find that 5 to 10% of those have physical findings that would be consistent with a claim of sodomy.
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever done any follow-up to determine if, in fact, all of the 100 cases you saw that year, which percentage of those turned out to be true?
I'm going to object to vague.
Do you understand the question?
Yes, I think I understand the question. Well, within the...
Okay, I can make it real simple.
Okay.
Let me redo it. Okay. How do you know if a child's telling you the truth?
I base my opinion as to whether the child's telling the truth on the credibility of the history given. Its reproducibility, its use of the child's own terminology within the limits of the child's exposure to other terms by others, those kinds of things. And coupled with, in those cases that have physical changes, of course, the physical examination. And if there are independent corroboration, such as a confession or an eyewitness, then that would add to the knowledge base.
When you interview these children who you then examine, would that be in the course of a few hours?
Yes.
And do you do follow-up studies with these children? Follow-up visits?
On occasion. The majority of cases we do not.
Basically, children are brought to you for an initial physical diagnosis, correct?
That's correct.
And not for treatment or anything else?
No, I don't know, not for direct treatment. The only children that I would get involved in direct treatment would be those children that had fecal soiling in association. That's a very small percentage.
Now, I believe you indicated that as to Lyle Menendez, you looked at his pediatric medical history, and what you found remarkable about it were the number of visits.
Objection, Madam Stacy.
Rephrase the question.
The number of recordations of visits.
Objection to the first part of the question.
All right, yes, why don't you rephrase that?
Okay. When you looked at Lyle Menendez's medical records, did you find an above-average number of pediatric visits for a child of his age?
Well, I was specific about an above-average number of recorded visits because being a physician and working with medical records, it's often very difficult to get a hold of medical records. So to find that many documented visits is unusual.
All right. Did it appear that he was taken to the doctor a lot?
It did.
I believe you indicated that you noticed some stomach pains recorded in Lyle Menendez's history. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are stomach pains diagnostic of sexual abuse?
No.
Okay. Are they diagnostic of other kinds of childhood ailments,
Of course.
such as the flu?
Yes.
Could also be diagnostic of stress.
Yes.
And it could be diagnostic of stress associated with things other than sexual abuse, correct?
Yes.
Are headaches diagnostic of sexual abuse?
No.
And are they, when I use the term diagnostic, what do you understand me to be saying?
That could be the only explanation.
Okay, so there are other explanations for children having headaches, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, the fact that you found no anal scarring in either of the defendants doesn't mean to you that they were not sodomized, correct?
That's correct.
But there's another, isn't it also true that another explanation is that they weren't anally penetrated, if there's no such findings?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Then you be direct.
Very briefly. Dr. English, when children come in and report that they've been sodomized, you take a history from them, right?
That's correct.
And you also do a physical examination.
That's correct.
And based upon both that, you come to some internal conclusion or your own conclusion as to whether or not this is a credible report. Is that correct?
Correct.
Have you been involved in cases in Los Angeles County in which the prosecution has charged someone with an act of sodomy absent physical findings?
Yes.
Okay. And have you also been involved in that case in testifying as an expert that many times there are not physical findings of sodomy in a child?
Yes.
And have you also been involved in cases in Los Angeles County in which the prosecution has proceeded with charges of sodomy without corroboration, such as physical findings or a confession by the perpetrator?
Objection, irrelevant to the answer.
Assistant.
Mrs. Bozanich asked you about the throat injury that's in exhibit, I believe, 299 in front of you. And you
Yes.
said that could have been caused by oral copulation. Is that correct?
Correct.
You can't say what caused that particular injury.
No.
Would it be helpful to you to have the emergency room records referred to in that exhibit? Because there apparently was an initial visit at the emergency room the day before.
It might be helpful.
Okay, and have you been told that we, meaning the defense, has tried to obtain those emergency room records and have been unable to do so?
Excuse me, that is hearsay.
To state.
Does the age of the child have any affect the frequency with which you would expect to see physical signs of sodomy?
Yes and no. In those rare cases of children under the age of 5 that are sodomized, I would say, or relatively rare cases, I would say the incidence of positive physical findings might be somewhat higher than it is in older children. But the vast majority of cases of sodomy that are alleged are in children older than that, 5 and up. And in those cases, the likelihood of physical changes is very small. Even in the children under the age of 5, the likelihood of physical changes doesn't exceed 10 to 15%, even though I think the average layperson is surprised by that, but that's our experience.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Anything else?
You use the term suture. Does that mean stitches?
Stitches, yes.
Should I have stitches?
Yes. Sorry.
Anything else? Okay, thank you. Yes, up down here, too.
My name is Edward Fenno, F-E-N-N-O.
Can the witness have some water? Okay. Okay, Mr. Fenno, do you both work and go to school?
I go to school and I'm doing an externship right now.
And where do you go to school?
USC Law Center.
You're a law student?
Law student.
And your extern is sort of a job?
I work full-time for a federal judge, but I get full school credit for it.
Okay. For a federal judge here in Los
In
Angeles?
Los Angeles. I don't get paid, I just get school credit.
Okay. And are you acquainted with Lyle and Eric Menendez?
Yes.
And how did you make their acquaintance, or either of them?
Thank you. I went to Princeton. I met Lyle at Princeton. I was a senior when he was a freshman.
And are you a tennis player, or were you a tennis player before you went to law school?
Yes.
Were you on the Princeton tennis team?
I played junior varsity mostly, but I practiced with the varsity some.
Is that how you got to know Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
In the fall of 1988, did you come to California in order to practice tennis with Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
And did you take up residence at that point with the Menendez family?
Yes.
When you came here in the fall of 1988, where was the family residing?
They had a house in Calabasas, a small rented house.
And did you move into that house?
Yes.
And at some point after you moved into that house, did the family move to a new house?
In Beverly Hills.
And how long after you started living with them did they move to Beverly Hills?
3 or 4 weeks, maybe. I think.
And did you continue your residence with the family when they moved to Beverly Hills?
Yes.
When the family moved to Beverly Hills, where did Lyle take up residence?
Lyle lived in the guest house. There's a main house, and then in the back, past the swimming pool, is a guest house.
And from the beginning, he lived there?
Yeah, right away.
And where did you live?
I lived in the main house, at the top of the stairs, the gray room on the right.
You say the gray room. Why was it called that?
Well, each of the rooms was basically a different color scheme. Mine was mostly gray and maroon.
And where did Eric Menendez live when you were living in the gray room?
He lived down the hall from me. I don't know, his room was kind of brown.
Okay. Is that the brown
Tan,
room?
I don't
the
know.
tan room?
Something like that.
For how many weeks or months did you live continuously at the Beverly Hills house?
Okay, well, I lived there from, I guess, the middle of October. I got to California in the middle of September, so about the middle of October through until the middle of December. And then I went home to Boston, where I'm from, for Christmas. And then
And how long were you gone for that break for Christmas?
I think 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay. So you were gone. By the way, before you went, was there a party, a Christmas party at the house?
That was after I left.
Okay, so you were gone by the time of the party.
Right.
Were you, before you left, had the house been professionally decorated yet?
I don't think so. I think it was when I came back that I saw the decoration.
When you came back, did you see that the house was professionally decorated in a Christmas theme?
Well, there was a very big tree and lots of decoration. I didn't know it was professional or not. But
Okay.
Sure.
And apart from the tree, were there also like floral centerpieces and bunting on the staircase and things like that?
There were, I don't know what bunting is, but there were
Like
things on the staircase.
boughs
Yes.
of greenery. And how long, if you remember, and I know I've never asked you this before, but how long, if you remember, did this Christmas stuff stay in the house?
Jeez. I really don't remember.
Do you recall if it stayed even after it had all turned brown and wilted?
I don't recall.
Okay. When you came back from Boston, how long did you continuously maintain residence with the Menendez family before you left again?
I think it was about a month and a half, early January to about the middle of February, and then I left for a month to play tennis in a tournament in Israel, and then I came back.
Is there a tournament in Israel? Is this the professional tennis tournament?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And were you trying to become a professional tennis player at that time?
Yes.
Is there a tournament in Israel every February to March?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And are you aware that Eric Menendez went on that same tour the next
Yes.
year?
Objection. Calls for hearsay with the story.
Overrule the interesting.
Now, during the time that you lived in the Beverly Hills house, did you become aware of any practice of Mr. and Mrs. Menendez concerning locking the door to their bedroom?
They did that on a consistent basis. They usually go up to bed pretty shortly after dinner and usually lock the door.
And this was from the very beginning when they moved into that house?
As far as I can remember, yes.
Are you aware of any occasions that you can remember when Mr. or Mrs. Menendez fell asleep in the family room watching television?
No.
Are you aware of their practice with respect to watching television in the evenings?
Like I said, they usually went upstairs after dinner, so I don't remember them watching television at all in the den. I watch television in the den, but I think they had a big screen TV upstairs. I think they mostly watch TV upstairs.
Now, how would you describe this house with respect to whether it was one in which sounds traveled easily from room to room or didn't travel easily from room to room?
It's hard for me to say exactly. I mean, from my room, I don't remember hearing a lot of loud noises. I had a little stereo as well, so I don't remember it being loud. I don't remember hearing things through the walls, but I'm no expert at sound.
But it seemed quiet in your room.
Yeah.
And you said Eric's room, was that on the same floor as yours?
Yeah, it was just right down the hall.
And when Eric was in his bedroom, by the way, was his door usually left open or was it closed?
I think it was usually closed.
And could you hear any sounds from Eric's room when you were in your room?
I don't think I remember ever hearing any sounds from Eric's room at all. I mean, when I was in my room.
And when you were living there during this period from October 88 to mid-February, Eric was how old?
Eric was a senior in high school, so he had his 18th birthday while I was there.
Okay. So he was 17 and 18?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
And do you know if he tended to spend the usual teenager's amount of time on the telephone?
Objection. Since fact not evidence of the usual opinion.
I'll rephrase the question. Did he seem to spend a lot of time
He
on the
spent a lot
telephone?
of time on the telephone.
And could you hear him on the telephone from your room?
No.
And did he listen to music as teenagers tend to do?
Yes, I don't remember exactly when, but he was in his room, he'd listen to music, talk on the phone, sure.
You were frequently in his room with him?
Yes.
Okay, so you knew he liked music, listened to music.
Yes.
But did you ever hear music coming from his room when you were in your room?
I don't remember hearing music from my room. I don't remember him listening to it particularly loudly, though.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, were you aware that the family employed a maid at the Beverly Hills house?
I think they had two maids. One came, and then I guess she got in a little bit of trouble, and the other one came.
Okay. And do you recall where the maid's room was in the house?
Yes. Downstairs, after you go through the kitchen, there's a little sort of a breakfast room. To the right of that was the maid's room. Sorry, I'll do the best I can.
So the maid's room was close to this breakfast room?
Yes.
And did one particular member of the Menendez family appear to spend a substantial amount of time in the breakfast room?
Mrs. Menendez was in there a large part of the day, at least all morning and a lot of the day.
And what would you observe her doing in the breakfast room that kept her there for a large part of the day?
She was on the phone. She called constantly. They were building a new house in Calabasas, and she was always on the phone with, I don't know, some contract or something. There was always some kind of problem, and she was in there on the phone.
And did you ever overhear her on the phone dealing with that where she was animated or upset or angry?
Frequently.
And did you ever hear her raise her voice while having these conversations?
I don't think she yelled into the phone, but she was certainly angry with the contractor people that weren't doing what they were supposed to do.
And did you ever see her and hear her yelling in that breakfast room?
Yes, but not relating to on the telephone.
I know, but in other
yes,
instances you saw her yelling.
A couple of times, sure.
And did you see her yelling at her son Lyle?
Yes.
And was this on more than one occasion?
Yes.
And was there a pattern to how she would, well, let me strike that. Was there a pattern to how she would appear from an emotional perspective when she was yelling at Lyle? I mean, would it be just a short burst and then it's over, or would it be something that escalated, that sort of thing?
Well, okay. The way it worked is that we traveled through the breakfast room a lot, to and from the house where we'd have breakfast and the tennis court. So as she saw Lyle come in from the guest house and travel back and forth, each time she saw him, the confrontation tended to get to be a little bit more abrasive each time. It got a little worse.
She would confront him?
Pretty much on a regular basis as we went through.
And during these confrontations, did she appear and express anger at him?
Yes.
Did he act angry and loud in return?
Rarely.
And would she If he did not respond, did that end her outburst?
No.
What would happen if he did not respond?
She would get more angry.
Now, was there a physical posture that you observed that she would frequently assume when she was angry this way?
Yes.
And could you show us what it was?
After a while, she'd kind of work up, you know, she'd kind of give me one of these, you know, oh, my son, you know. So it was like that. It was kind of a fist-clenching thing, like about here.
Mr. Fenno, you smile and you laugh when you describe this. Was it funny at the time?
Yes and no. It got kind of repetitive, so it got
So you
kind
didn't
of
take
silly.
it seriously?
I didn't think Lyle was in danger for his life. I mean, no.
Okay, but this was a behavior you saw over and over and over again?
Yes.
Were you there when Lyle was 5 or 6 and she did it?
No.
Now, were you aware that there were 3 different phone lines at that house?
Yes.
And were you aware of where those different lines could be answered from at the time you lived there?
There were a couple of different places. I can't remember exactly all of them. I know that at least the breakfast room had all 3 lines, and the den had all 3 lines, and there may have been other rooms that had all 3 lines. I can't really remember.
So even if Eric had a phone in his room and it had a particular phone number, people in the rest of the house could pick up that
So
line?
we used to answer Eric's phone in the den a lot.
And the same would be true of the line that was supposedly Lyle's in the guest house. Is that correct?
Yeah, you could answer Lyle's guest house phone in the main house as well.
So if someone, for example, wanted to call, say, from Eric's line to Lyle's line, someone in the den or in the breakfast room or somewhere else could pick that phone up?
Yes.
Now, when you first went to stay with the Menendez family, did you feel that you were welcomed equally by both parents?
Yes.
And did you feel that that continued?
No. I was under the impression that I was invited to stay for 3 months, pretty much through December. After being there about a month, I got the feeling that neither parent was particularly interested in my being there. Mrs. Menendez didn't mind so much, but Mr. Menendez got less and less interested in my being there.
So his behavior towards you changed?
Yes, he talked to me less and less. He was less excited to see me.
So you felt...
I think I overstayed my welcome playthrough, but anyway.
Okay. The sense you got was that he felt you overstayed your welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in January of 1989, did Lyle Menendez return to Princeton?
Yes.
And so you stayed on for some period of time after Lyle was gone?
Yes.
Did you practice with Eric during that time, or...?
Before Christmas, I told Eric that I would love to stay if that was okay with him and his family. And he said he would ask his parents. And I guess they said yes, because he said, sure, it's okay if you come back for a couple of months afterward. So I did.
And that time, were you practicing and playing tennis with Eric?
Yes.
Now, were you as good a tennis player as Lyle?
No.
Were you as good a tennis player as Eric?
Eric and I were very even.
Did you become friends with Eric?
Yes.
Did you like him?
Yes.
Would you spend time talking to Eric in his room?
Yes.
Were there occasions when your visits with Eric would be stopped or interrupted?
Yes.
Would you describe how that would happen?
On a pretty regular basis. Mr. Menendez would come, either he would let Eric know ahead of time, or he would actually come to the room, and I would have to leave. It would either be Mr. Menendez would come in and he'd say, Edward, it's time for you to leave, or Eric would tell me ahead of time, my dad's coming up, you gotta go. So I'd leave.
You'd leave. And when you'd leave, Mr. Menendez and Eric would be in the room?
Mr. Menendez would close the door behind him.
Now, before Lyle had left for Princeton, did you ever observe Mr. Menendez and Lyle having lengthy discussions somewhere in the house?
Yes.
And was this a routine thing, or was it rare?
Somewhere in between routine and rare.
So it was something that happened once in a while?
On a reasonable basis. I mean, yeah, I don't know, once in a while. That's good.
Okay. Where in the house would you see these conversations or discussions?
Yeah. They had, there's sort of a downstairs study where Mr. Menendez would do work, and he would bring Lyle into the study, and they'd talk.
Okay, and did you ever overhear any portions of these conversations?
Not really. I didn't think it was my place to listen.
Okay, well, you had told me at one time that you characterized these discussions as a particular type of talk.
Well, it was. I could hear the speaking. I couldn't tell very much about what they said, but I mean, it was talking. I mean, I don't know.
Well, did you characterize what kind of talk this was?
I can tell you from what Lyle told me afterward, if that's what you're asking me.
Okay, then why don't you tell us, not offered for the truth, Your Honor, what Lyle told you afterwards? About what the nature, not what was said, but the nature of the discussions.
The conversations were generally Mr. Menendez teaching Lyle about whatever, about tennis or about how to do something, how his life should progress.
Educational, would you say?
Educational.
Instructional, would you say?
Yeah, instructional.
Directional, would you say?
directional, yeah.
And did you observe in the interaction of this family the extent to which Mr. Menendez exercised decision-making and control over Lyle's life?
I observed it, yes.
And if you could characterize, what would you say was the extent to which Mr. Menendez exerted decision-making and control over Lyle's life?
Mr. Menendez attempted to exert, as far as I can tell, pretty much complete control, but didn't always manage to get it. I mean, Lyle, tried to do some stuff for himself.
Okay. When it came to anything affecting his future, his schooling, his goals, was that...
His future schooling, his girlfriends, a lot of times. I remember he tried to set up Lyle with some girl who was going to go to Princeton. He thought that would be the kind of girl Lyle should go out with.
And did that seem to you unusual, at least in your experience, for a parent of a person as old as Lyle to be exercising that kind of control?
Yes.
Would you say that you observed what you thought was a lot of control, a little control, medium control?
I would call it a lot of control.
Did you observe, did you ever observe Mr. Menendez having discussions with Eric in that study, that paneled room downstairs?
I don't remember seeing that. I think he just talked to Lyle down there.
Was it your recollection, you've indicated that there would be these times when Mr. Menendez would come into Eric's room and you'd leave and they'd be in there together,
Yeah.
Is that right? Are you aware of any other place in the house besides Eric's bedroom where he and his father would go off alone?
I don't remember. I think he spent pretty much all of his alone time with Eric in Eric's room.
Did you know Mr. Fenno, besides, you played tennis with Lyle while you were living at the home, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you swim together?
Yes.
Did you go out socially together?
Yes.
Did you hang around a lot?
Yes.
Were you aware that Lyle Menendez wore a hairpiece?
No.
Was it ever mentioned?
Never.
Did Eric ever mention it?
No.
You have a moment, Tron. Testified that Lyle told you what the nature of these discussions with his father in the study were. Did he tell you during the time you were living there?
Yes.
Would he tell you right after these talks, or?
I mean, I don't think he came running to me as soon as he had to talk with his dad, but I don't know if I asked. Sometimes he told me, sometimes he didn't, sometimes I didn't ask.
Okay. But when he did tell you about these discussions, he characterized them in the way that you've described, is that correct?
There was a lot of directional, educational, yeah, those are good words. I mean, sometimes he was in trouble as well.
Okay. Did there appear to be a rule in this home that Eric and Lyle could do nothing without parental permission, at least a parent rule?
I don't know about nothing. I mean, generally they had to get permission to do things, if that's what you mean.
And were there things that they did, to your knowledge, that were perfectly legal and legitimate things, but without parental permission?
Sure.
And did they get in trouble for doing things without permission?
Objection made.
Did you ever see Mr. Menendez angry? But let me ask you this. There was an incident, was there not, where you saw Mr. Menendez yelling?
Yes.
Apart from that, were there other times when you saw him angry where he didn't yell?
I believe so. I can't pick one right out.
Was there a particular look or demeanor that Mr. Menendez had that let you know that he was unhappy or angry?
Yes. I mean, he used to he smiles a lot, and he wouldn't smile. He'd give you a very sort of stern stare, and you knew that he was disappointed or upset or something.
While you lived with the family, Mr. Fenno, did you have your own key to the house?
No.
Did Lyle or Eric have their own key to the house?
I don't think so. There's a key sometimes we could take on the way out, but they never really locked the door, so I don't think we ever took the key, not very often.
Apart from their not locking the door, is your answer that they did not have their own key?
I don't really know if they had their own key.
Did you ever see them use their own key?
I don't think so. If they used a key, I think it would have been, well, we almost never used a key, and if it was, it would have been from the hallway.
Common key?
Right.
Okay. Now, the question is, were the doors usually locked or unlocked?
They were unlocked, almost always.
And this house had an alarm system, did it not?
Yes.
Are you aware of any time when the alarm was on?
No.
What would happen? I take it that you would go out at night and come back late on occasion.
Yes.
And I take it that Lyle and Eric would do the same.
Yes.
So how would you get in the house if you came back late at night?
We just walk in the front door.
So it was left unlocked?
Right, yeah.
So would it be unusual if you had gone out at a time, say, when the parents were home and they knew you left, and then you came back and found the door locked?
Yes, very unusual.
In your experience, did that ever happen while you were there?
I seem to remember being locked out once somewhere along the way, but I can't remember whether it was at night or what. I do think we were locked out once. I mean, not completely. We were able to get in a different door.
Do you know if there was a back door that was usually unlocked as well?
There was in the TV room, there were some big doors to the backyard swimming pool area. Those were unlocked most of the time as well.
Now, we had talked before about Mrs. Menendez being in the breakfast room and that this was the scene of these yelling and angry things with Lyle. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this is the room very close to the maid's room?
Yes.
Did you ever see the maid during these yelling or arguments?
Probably. I didn't think about it.
Were you familiar with the contents of the garage at this home?
Yes.
And what was in the garage? Well, first of all, was the contents of the garage unchanged from the time the family moved there until you left?
Yes.
And what was in the garage?
Junk, boxes, mostly boxes and boxes of stuff from their old house in New Jersey.
Had you seen boxes and boxes of stuff at the house in Calabasas as well?
I don't. There were some boxes, but not like this. I think they were all in storage.
So things had come out of storage and were now in the garage in Beverly
Right.
Hills? And what made you think these boxes and boxes of stuff were from New Jersey? Did they say?
That's what they told me. That's what the family told me.
And did you ever go through these boxes and boxes of stuff?
No.
Did you ever see either Eric or Lyle going through it?
No.
Did you, during the months that you lived at this house, ever see photographs of Eric and Lyle from their childhood lying around the house?
And I don't think so. They took photographs right then, like while we were playing tennis. There were pictures of us from last week or whatever, but I don't remember seeing childhood photographs at all.
So you didn't see any quantity of like growing up years photographs?
No. The family photo album? No, I never saw the family
Never
photo.
saw family photo album or albums?
No.
Do you know whether there were photos in those boxes and boxes in the garage?
I don't know.
In seeing the interaction of this family, and just focusing on Mr. Menendez's interactions with each of his sons, did he appear to interact with them the same or differently?
That's kind of a big question, but I mean,
Yep.
he seemed to be more interested in what Lyle was doing, if that's what you mean.
Was he sterner and stricter with Eric or with Lyle?
I think it was even.
Was he stern and strict from what you could see?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Fenno, you have interviewed a number of times with the Beverly Hills Police Department, is that correct?
Yes.
And was the most recent interview on June 4th, well, strike that, on May 24th, 1993.
I'm not sure. It was, I don't know, yeah, that could be right.
If I show you, have you looked at a copy of the report that Detective Zoller initially drafted of
Yes.
that interview? And did you, in fact, even make some corrections after you received a copy of it?
Yes.
And if I were to show you that report, do you think it might refresh your recollection as to when it was that you were interviewed?
If it has a date on it, sure.
It does.
Okay.
If I may approach, Your Honor.
Yes.
Fenno, if you would just look at the very first
Yes,
part.
it says on May 24th, 1993.
And does that refresh your recollection?
Yes, it does.
That's when you were interviewed most recently.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Fenno, do you recall a time when you were staying at the Beverly Hills house when you became aware of the fact that Eric had received an acceptance to the University of California, Berkeley?
Yes.
And can you tell us when that was, roughly?
I believe it was after I came back from Christmas, but before I went to Israel, so that would make it January of 89.
Okay. And to the best of your, well, was there a discussion at the dinner table on this particular day about the fact that Eric had been accepted at Berkeley?
Yes.
And to the best of your knowledge, was this the first college acceptance that he had received?
Yes.
Now, Eric has testified that his parents were both excited that he had got accepted to Berkeley. Would that be an accurate
Yes.
characterization? Did they seem surprised that he had gotten into that school? Did they express surprise?
I think so. It's hard to say. They were very excited. That's hard to say.
Now, Did Eric privately tell you what his preference was with respect to UC campuses at that time?
Yes.
And what UC campus did he tell you he preferred in January of 1989?
He told me he'd like to go to UCLA.
And did he indicate whether or not that had anything to do with his perception of their tennis team at UCLA?
He thought UCLA had a better tennis team.
And was it your understanding that wherever Eric went to college, he was going to at least try to be on the tennis team? Did Eric tell you that it was his intention to be on the tennis team?
That was something that was very important, actually. He was one of the reasons I stayed in California after Christmas was so that Eric could train and get a national ranking so that he could get onto the tennis team without having to walk on, so that he would be recruited for the tennis team.
Okay. So was it your understanding then that his tennis playing was a component of his college acceptance?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And did Eric express to you any other reason why he preferred UCLA to Berkeley?
I think so. What happened was the night that he got into Berkeley, he kind of pulled me aside afterward and he said, you know, I think I'd like to go to UCLA. And he said it was because he had friends around here, and so he wanted to be near them.
And you were aware, had you not, that he had moved to California when he was about 15 and a half and left all his friends behind?
I was aware that he moved to California when he was 15 and a half.
Okay. And that he had just moved again from Calabasas to Beverly Hills? And did he appear to have friends from Beverly Hills High School? Did you meet any of those kids?
I met plenty of them.
In fact, you played tennis with a lot of them, did you not? Now, do you know when it was that Eric was accepted at UCLA?
No.
Do you believe it was after you left?
I think it was definitely after. It was at least when I went to Israel. It may have been after I came back from that as well. I was only there for about a week after Israel, so I don't really remember.
Well, you say you were only there for a week. You only got back to their home and stayed a week after the Israel tour. And at that time, do you know if he had yet been accepted?
I don't remember.
So you don't recall any conversations about the fact that UCLA had accepted him?
I knew at some point that he got into UCLA.
But you stayed in touch even after you stopped
Right, we
living
stayed in touch after.
So you don't know if it was while you were living there or later, do you?
I don't know. I don't know.
Now, were you aware of Eric ever turning Berkeley down?
I assume he must have eventually, but no, I don't know.
You knew that he didn't immediately accept because he wanted to see if he could get into UCLA.
UCLA and Brown. He was also waiting to hear from Brown.
He was waiting to hear from Brown also?
Right.
And to your understanding, is Brown an East Coast school?
Right, it's in Rhode Island.
It's in where?
Rhode Island.
And is it an Ivy League school?
Yes.
Now, did you tell Detective Zoller on that May 24th statement that Mr. Menendez was upset because Eric turned down Berkeley?
I may have.
But in fact, you don't have that information that he turned down Berkeley, isn't that true?
That is true. I mean, when I reread that statement, is it okay if I speak? When I reread that statement, I mean, it gives the basic idea of what I said. I'm not sure if I exactly said turn down or whatever, but it's, I mean, basically, yeah, basically, I don't know exactly whether he turned it down. I don't know exactly.
Did you observe?
Excuse me, could we take a brief recess?
Okay, sure. I will resume at 1:45 the hour, ladies and gentlemen.
Mr. Fenn, I wanted to ask you, we've been talking about the interview that you gave to Detective Zoller on May 24th, 1993. Do you recall that you also gave an interview to Detectives Linehan and Zoller in January of 1990, a telephone interview?
I gave a telephone interview with the police. I don't remember who it was with.
Okay, the Beverly Hills Police.
Well, yeah, the Beverly Hills Police.
Okay. Now, just to get back to a couple of points from your testimony, you indicated that there, the conversations between Mr. Menendez and Lyle, the ones that took place in the study, you mentioned occasionally it might have something to do with Lyle being in some kind of trouble. You recall that?
Yeah.
Can you give us an example, something you remember, about what kind of trouble you mean?
I can remember one time where Lyle had promised his parents that he was going to sell his car, so his parents bought him a new car. And I remember that he didn't sell his old car, and he ended up having two cars, and Mr. Menendez was upset about that.
So that was one of those times that he had him in the study?
They talked in the study.
Now, concerning Mrs. Menendez and these confrontations in the breakfast room, what were you said that she would confront Lyle as he was coming in the morning?
Right, from the guest house.
Okay. And what was the topic? I mean, what was she confronting him about?
It was pretty much always chores, household duties.
Did Lyle Menendez ever discuss with you Eric's college and what Lyle's preference for Eric's college was?
Lyle wanted Eric to go to Princeton with Lyle.
Why?
So that he told me so they could be together.
Thank you. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Any examination on behalf of the co-defendant?
Can I sit down? Oh, yeah, you're right. Excuse me. I do have one other question.
All right.
You indicated there was only one time you actually heard Mr. Menendez yelling and screaming.
Yes.
Was that an episode that occurred late at night?
Yes.
And did it involve a person that Eric knew?
Yes.
And who was that person?
Craig Signorelli?
And did you hear Mr. Menendez yelling something at Craig Signorelli?
Yes.
Did this take place outside the Beverly Hills house?
Yes.
And when it took place, were you in the gray room?
Yeah, it took place pretty much in the driveway, and I was in the gray room, which overlooks the driveway.
And you looked out and saw this?
Yeah, I saw the shapes.
And what did you hear Mr. Menendez yelling at Craig Signorelli?
Can I say the exact words?
You may say the exact words.
Yes, you may do so.
He said, if you ever, it was very loud, but if you ever come around here again, I'll fucking kill you. And it was in a forceful, not like I just said it, but, you know what I mean? Loud.
And did you then see Mr. Menendez do something with Eric?
He pretty much pulled Eric back into the house. He took him back in.
Pulled him?
I think so.
I have nothing further.
Examination?
Yes.
Mr. Fenno, at the time that this incident occurred with Mr. Signorelli, had you ever met him before?
No, I hadn't.
And did you actually witness the incident with your own eyes?
I heard stuff in the beginning, so then I went to look.
And where did you go to look?
To the bathroom next to the gray room.
So were you inside of the house when you witnessed?
Yes, I was inside the house.
And you were on the second story?
Yes.
And you heard Mr. Menendez clearly make the statement?
Yes.
Did you actually see Craig Signorelli when this occurred?
I didn't see his face, if that's what you mean.
Okay. How did you know it was Craig Signorelli?
Because, I don't know exactly. There were two ways.
Your Honor, at this point, we should approach.
All right, you may.
Mr. Fenno, at some time after this incident, were you told that the person in the car was Craig Signorelli?
That was one of the two ways that I knew, yes.
Okay. How many times in this case have you met with the defense attorneys?
Your Honor, I'm going to check on relevance again.
Overruled.
3 or 4?
And do you remember the first time you met with him?
Yes. Trying to get the date. It was after I came to California to go to law school, so it was September or October 19... What's this? It's 93.
91?
91.
Your second year of law school? Or?
It was my first year of law school, about a month after school started.
I believe you indicated you graduated from Princeton University. Would that have been in the spring of 1988?
Yes.
And did you attend Princeton for all 4 years?
Yes.
And did you consider yourself to be an athlete while you were there?
Yes.
Okay. Were you familiar with other athletes who attended Princeton University?
Yes.
Were there any athletes at Princeton who were there on athletic scholarships, to your knowledge?
No.
Were there people in the athletics program at Princeton who were not as academically gifted as some of the other students at Princeton?
Yes.
You indicated the first house in which you stayed in Calabasas was a small rented house. Is that correct?
Yes.
How many bedrooms were in that house, if you recall?
4?
Did you have your own room?
Yes.
What was your understanding of who extended the invitation to you to come and live with the Menendez family?
Lyle did.
Did you have any contact with his parents before you came to live in California?
A little bit.
And could you describe the nature of the contact you had with his parents?
My parents sent his parents a letter. My parents wanted to know if it'd be all right if I came to California. They didn't send a letter back, but we ended up speaking to them on the phone briefly, and they said it'd be fine.
All right, so you had the permission of the parents to come?
Yes.
And at the time that you had this understanding with the parents, did you have an understanding of how long you would live there?
Yes.
And what was that?
About 3 months until Christmas.
And what was your understanding when you came to California as to why you were coming to California to live with the Menendez family?
To play tennis with Lyle. I mean, there are a whole lot of reasons. The primary reason was to play tennis with Lyle. That would help me get better, help Lyle get better.
Did you have a goal regarding your tennis when you graduated from Princeton?
I want to be a professional tennis player.
And did you have any goal as to getting ranked nationally?
I want to be ranked nationally and in the world.
Did you eventually obtain a national or worldwide ranking?
Both.
Right. And what was your national ranking, if you recall, the best it ever was?
64th in the amateur division.
And what was your worldwide ranking?
I was 783rd in doubles.
And I believe you indicated that, in your opinion, Lyle Menendez was in fact a superior tennis player to you. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Eric Menendez was, when you were practicing with him, about the same?
Yes.
And when did you obtain these rankings that you've just described?
The 64th in the country was for the year of 1988. The rankings come out in February of 89.
All right, so what's for calendar year 88?
Right. The other one, I think I reached 783rd about a year after that. It's hard to remember exactly.
I believe you indicated that after Lyle Menendez returned to Princeton University, you stayed in the family home and you continued to play tennis with Eric Menendez. Is that correct? When you practiced tennis with Eric Menendez, was his father ever present during these practices?
Yes.
And did you observe his father's behavior during your practices?
Yes.
What was he like? How did he act?
I'm going to object, trying to be honest though.
Overruled.
Sometimes he didn't say anything. Sometimes he came onto the court to coach Eric.
All right. Did you ever play tennis against the father?
No.
Do you know if he knew how to play tennis?
I know that he wasn't a very good tennis player
And how do you know that?
because he told me.
Oh, okay. Did you ever see him play tennis?
No, he told me he was a C-level club player, which to me means he's not much of a
Okay, I don't play tennis, so what's a C-level club player?
somebody I could have beat left-handed.
Okay, and you're a right-handed player?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Was Mr. Menendez nice to you?
Sometimes.
All right, and when he wasn't nice to you, how did he behave towards you?
He pretty much ignored me completely.
Okay. During the period of time that you lived in the home, you were not employed in a full-time job, is that correct?
Right, yeah.
And during the day when Eric Menendez was in high school and after Lyle Menendez went back to college, did you stay home around the house with Mrs. Menendez?
When Eric went to school, I usually tried to find somebody else to play tennis with.
And where did you play tennis?
Usually on their court in the backyard, on the Menendez court in the backyard.
Did you ever play tennis anywhere else?
Yes,
And that would have been away from the Menendez home?
yes.
Now, at some point, you gave lessons on the tennis court at the Menendez home, is that
Yes.
correct? And did you give some of the proceeds from your tennis lessons to Mr. and Mrs. Menendez?
Yes.
Okay, aside from that, did you pay them any rent during the period of time that you were there?
No.
And did they provide you with room and board?
Yes.
How did Mrs. Menendez treat you during the period of time that you were there?
It changed. In the beginning, I was kind of, in the very beginning I was a visitor, and then I was a little more of a family member. But then, like I said, I think maybe my welcome ran out a little bit. She treated me less friendly after that.
You got the impression maybe she wanted you to go home?
Well, we had a talk about it after a while.
Okay, and you had a talk with Mrs. Menendez?
Mrs. Menendez.
Was the topic matter the length of your stay?
Yeah, how long was I going to be staying?
And did you discuss with her how long you would be staying?
Yes, I told her that the impression I was under was that I was supposed to stay until Christmas, and that I had made plans in that regard, and it would be very difficult for me to leave before that.
And what was her response to you after you had this discussion with her? How did she treat you?
Much better.
Okay, because you told her you'd leave at Christmas?
Well, no, I think because she understood that it wasn't that I was overstaying my welcome, it was just that there was a misunderstanding as to how long I was welcome. I thought I was welcome all that time, and maybe they didn't understand that.
Okay. But you did stay until Christmas, correct?
I did stay until Christmas.
And then you came back after Christmas?
Eric invited me back after Christmas.
Now, did you have any discussion with Mr. and Mrs. Menendez about this extension of your stay when Eric invited you?
No.
And when you came back after your Christmas holiday in Boston, did Mrs. Menendez continue to treat you decently?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. During the time that you practiced tennis, either with Lyle or Eric, did Mrs. Menendez ever come out and give you coaching tips or tennis tips or anything like that?
I don't think so.
During the period of time that you lived with the Menendez family, did Mr. Menendez travel on business?
Yes.
Could you describe the frequency of his business travels? Was it weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, bi-monthly?
Do you mean how long did he travel for, or how frequently did he travel?
How frequently did he travel?
I don't know. Once every. To my recollection, he made short trips, and they were maybe once every 10 days, once every 2 weeks.
And what by short trips do you mean less than a week?
Oh yeah,
And they were
a day or two.
And were they always during the work week, or were they ever over the weekend, if you recall?
I don't really remember.
Do you know if Mr. and Mrs. Menendez ever traveled with either of their sons to tennis tournaments while you lived in the house?
Yes.
On how many occasions do you recall that happening?
More than half of the tennis tournaments, usually Mr. Menendez would come.
All right, how many tennis tournaments are we talking about that we need to divide in half?
We played one almost every week, so every weekend, I should say. So, 12, 15, maybe 15 tournaments. I don't know. It would be in my tennis book. I don't know.
All right, and when you arrived at the Menendez home in Calabasas in September of '88, were these tournaments ongoing at that time? The weekend
Yes.
tournaments?
Yes.
Okay. At the time that you lived in the Menendez home, did either of the brothers ever have any other house guests?
Yes.
And could you describe who had the house guests and how long the person was there?
Lyle had 2 guests that stayed with us. He had a friend named Cole, who was a friend, I guess, from high school. And he stayed for probably about a month, I think. And his girlfriend, Jamie, stayed for, I can't remember, intermittent periods with Jamie. She'd come for maybe a week, and I can't really remember with Jamie. She stayed, but I can't remember how long.
Now, when Cole Kruger came for the month, this was both Cole Kruger and Jamie were there while you were there, correct?
Yes.
And when Mr. Kruger came for a month, did he stay in the main house or the guest house?
The guest house.
And when Jamie came, did she stay in the main house or the guest house?
The guest house.
Did you ever see Mrs. Menendez interact with Jamie?
Yes.
And how did Mrs. Menendez treat Jamie?
She treated her okay.
Did you ever see her say anything abusive or offensive to Jamie?
No.
And by Jamie, we're talking about Jamie Pizarczyk, right?
Yes.
Okay. I believe you indicated that many times you saw Mrs. Menendez angry while she was in the breakfast room in the back of the house?
Yeah, the breakfast room.
And it was your recollection that she was angry because she was having problems with her contractors?
That was a regular reason.
Okay, I take it you've never had remodeling done. Is that
No.
correct? Okay. When you saw Mrs. Menendez angry, did you ever see her strike another human being?
No.
Did you ever see Mrs. Menendez with a weapon, such as a knife or a gun or anything else?
No.
Okay, how about Mr. Menendez? When he was angry, did you ever see him strike anyone?
No.
Did you ever see him with a weapon?
No.
Were you aware of any weapons in the house?
No.
Now, you indicated that there was a study in which Mr. Menendez often had talks with his son Lyle.
Yes.
Do you remember any posters or large photographs in the study of any people?
I don't remember.
Do you remember a photograph of Martin Luther King?
No.
Now, when Lyle was dealing with his mother, you said that oftentimes she would become angry with him as he passed through the breakfast room to go out to the tennis court. Is that correct?
Yes.
And she would be angry about him not doing chores and things like that?
She kind of accosted him when he first came in the morning, because that's the path he'd often travel from the guest house. And then again as we went out on the tennis court, so that was a regular thing.
And what was the subject matter of her accosting her son?
Like I said, it was pretty much about household duties, chores.
Okay. Did you ever see Lyle Menendez perform any of these household duties or chores?
Rarely.
Okay. What was the condition of the guest house in terms of its cleanliness?
I don't know, normal for a 22-year-old kid or whatever.
Okay. What's normal for a 22-year-old kid?
Some clothes around, some CDs on the floor, but no bugs or whatever.
No bugs?
No food lying around. Or anything.
Okay.
Sort of normal.
Messy but still cleanly. Is that how you would describe it?
Right.
Okay. Did you ever see Lyle Menendez argue with his mother?
No, not really.
All right. Do you remember talking to the police in January of 1990 in your first telephone contact with the Beverly Hills Police Department?
I remember that I spoke with him.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach, please? I'm going to show the witness a copy of the report. Mr. Fenno, I'm going to show you a copy of a front page of a Beverly Hills Police report. Dated, the date of the interview was January the 12th of 1990. Do you recall that sometime in January of 90 you had a telephone conversation with someone?
Yes.
Okay. And I have two things highlighted, but on the second one, I'd like you to read that to yourself and see if that refreshes your memory.
Yes, refreshing the memory.
All right. And do you have then an opinion as to whether or not you ever saw, not an opinion, but do you have a recollection now of ever seeing Lyle Menendez arguing with his mother?
It's still the same opinion. The argument was more one-sided. I mean, Mrs. Menendez would argue and Lyle wouldn't really.
All right. Now.
Yes.
When Lyle Menendez's mother would chastise him or argue with him, did he ever do anything? Did he ever respond to her in any way? Or would he ignore her?
He generally ignored her.
Did you ever hear him say anything to her that was somewhat derogatory, like go jump in a lake or something like that?
I don't think he would say, I don't remember him saying that.
Okay. Do you remember him talking back to her?
Maybe a little.
Okay. Do you remember telling us in May of 1993 that Lyle would ignore her or talk back to her, saying something like, go jump in a lake?
It's more like ignoring. The attitude was, go jump in a lake. I don't know if that he'd say that, but he wouldn't do what she asked him to do.
Now, during the period of time that you were living in the home, did Lyle have a girlfriend named Christy?
Christy came around when I was in Israel, so only during the 1 week after I came back from Israel was I living in the home when he had a girlfriend named Christy.
Did you ever meet Christy?
Yes.
Okay. Did Lyle Menendez ever tell you why he stopped seeing Christy?
I'm going to object. This is totally beyond the scope. Also, I would object on hearsay grounds.
Yes, under 1220 of the Evidence Code.
No, I don't believe it's relevant unless it's offered for truth.
It is offered for the truth, and it's offered pursuant to 1220.
It's not an issue.
All right, I'll hear counsel at the sidebar. All right, you may proceed. By the way, I did receive notes from a couple of the jurors regarding your obligations this afternoon, and we'll make sure that you're able to leave in time to do that. All right, you may proceed.
Mr. Fenno, did Lyle Menendez tell you why it was that he stopped seeing Christy?
I don't think so.
Okay, would it refresh your recollection to see a copy of the report of the interview with the prosecution on May the 24th of this year?
Maybe. I have an idea why.
All right, may I approach, please?
Yes.
I'm going to show you the third page of this report and ask you to look at the top part here.
Okay.
All right, does this refresh your recollection as to what Lyle Menendez told you about why he stopped seeing Christy?
It gives me the same recollection.
And what is your recollection?
I'm going to object since he testified he has an idea there's no foundation for personal knowledge.
What is your recollection, sir?
I think, I don't recall whether Lyle told me that he broke up with Christy or I don't know if that's part of the question, but who broke up with who? I don't know. In terms of why they broke up or what the problems were with Christy, I know an answer to that.
All right, and what did Lyle Menendez tell you as to why he broke up with Christy?
Lyle was worried. I don't know if Lyle broke up with Christy, so the question isn't correct. I don't know who broke up with who. Okay,
what did
once
Lyle
that's out of the way.
What did Lyle tell you about why the relationship ended?
Okay. I know a problem in the relationship was that Lyle was worried that Christy was going to get pregnant and have his child.
And did he indicate to you that he quit seeing her?
I know they stopped seeing each other.
Okay. Mr. Fenno, have you taken evidence yet in law school?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know what the requirements are for impeaching witnesses with statements?
Objection. Irrelevant.
Mr. Fenno, would you say that in this particular case your sympathies are with the defendants?
I don't want them to get the death penalty, if that's what you mean.
Okay. Would you say that your sympathies are with the defendants then, in that regard at least?
Yes.
Were you present, were you a friend of Lyle Menendez's in the fall of 1987?
Yes.
And were you aware of the reasons why he left Princeton University?
We're not going to check because it's beyond the scope. And cumulative.
Yes.
All right. Did Lyle Menendez discuss with you the reasons why he was leaving Princeton University?
I don't remember if he told me, but I found out.
Okay. So you have no independent recollection as to whether or not Lyle Menendez told you?
He probably told me. It was something the tennis team talked about a lot. I don't remember who I heard it from.
You know what hearsay is, right, Mr. Fenno?
Objection, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Fenno, you indicated that there were telephones in the house, and it was your recollection that there were 3 phone lines, correct?
I think there were at least 3.
Okay. Do you know whether or not there were car phones as well?
Yes.
What kind of cars did the Menendez family have when you lived with them?
Objection beyond the scope.
In the beginning, Mr. Menendez had a Cadillac, and then he had a big Mercedes. Mrs. Menendez had a small Mercedes, I think, the whole time.
How about the defendants? What kind of cars did they have?
Lyle had an Alfa Romeo and then a Volkswagen Beetle or something, and Eric had a Ford Escort.
Now, you indicated that Lyle Menendez was in a little trouble with his father because he wanted to buy a car and sell a car, and he ended up with 2 cars.
Yes.
What was the car he was going to sell, and what was the car he bought?
The Alfa Romeo was the one he was going to sell, and the Volkswagen was the one he bought.
So he did, in fact, have 2 cars at one time, to your knowledge?
Yes.
And I believe you went to visit Lyle Menendez after you left the Menendez house in the spring of 1989.
Yes.
And when you saw him at Princeton University, did he have that car at Princeton, the Beetle?
I don't know.
Did you ever see Mrs. Menendez drinking alcohol?
I believe wine.
All right,
I'm not really sure.
Did you ever see her in a state where you thought she was inebriated?
No.
Did you ever see her in a state where you thought that there was something wrong with her, like that she was maybe taking some sort of pills or anything?
She didn't look like she was on drugs.
Now, you were with her many times during the day when no one else was at home, is that correct?
Actually, not really. I mean, I played my tennis and she did her thing.
During the period of time that you observed the interaction between the defendants and their parents, did you ever see the defendants lie to their parents?
Yes.
And on how many occasions would you say you saw them lying to their parents?
More than a couple.
Was it something that was somewhat common?
Somewhat common.
Okay.
Yes.
And what kinds of things, first of all, did they both do it or just one of them?
Both.
And what kinds of things did they lie to their parents about?
Stuff when they got in trouble. If they did something wrong, you know, there was one time where Lyle, he was driving his dad's Cadillac and he kind of sideswiped me. The mirror got knocked off. And he didn't want to tell him that is what had happened. So I don't remember what the story was, but he told him some other kind of story about how that happened.
Okay, when he told him the other story, was it a detailed story or was it just sort of vague, you recall?
I think it was reasonably detailed.
Did you ever see Eric Menendez lie to his parents?
Yes.
And what kind of occasion did you see him lie?
The same kind of situation where they'd done something wrong and
didn't take responsibility for what was wrong?
And they didn't take responsibility.
Now, when Mr. Menendez would have these talks with Lyle in the study, that was during the time that Lyle was living in the guest house, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I believe you indicated that you were present at a family dinner when the discussion about Eric's acceptance to Berkeley came up, is that correct?
Yes.
And I believe you indicated that both Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were excited or expressed approval of this event, is that correct?
Yes.
Was the dinner a celebratory dinner? In other words, were they celebrating the fact that he'd gotten into Berkeley?
No.
Okay, was that a topic of some discussion at the dinner table that night?
Yes.
Now, who cooked dinner when you were there?
Usually Mrs. Menendez, maybe a little more than half the time.
How was her cooking?
I don't know, good pasta.
And when this topic of Berkeley came up, did Mr. Menendez, as well as his wife, express satisfaction or pleasure in the fact that Eric had gotten accepted there?
They were pleased, yeah.
And when you say they, both parents, is that correct?
Yeah, from what I remember, yeah, they were both happy.
All right. Now, do you remember talking to the prosecution again in May of 1993?
Yes.
And that was at the Beverly Hills Police Department with myself and Mr. Kuriyama and Detective Zoller, correct?
Yes.
And did you indicate then that Mr. Menendez was upset with Eric because Eric turned down Berkeley?
That's what you have written down.
All right. Well, did you or did you not say that?
I don't know.
Mr. Fenno, do you recall discussing the topic of Berkeley with us?
Yes.
In that interview room?
Yes.
And do you recall being asked about it again after you made the first statement?
Objection on its vague.
In the interview, being asked about it while I was with you?
Yes. In other words, after you mentioned the part about the parents being, Mr. Menendez being upset with Eric because he turned down Berkeley, do you remember that we asked you again if that's what happened?
I think so.
All right. Now, after this particular interview with the prosecution and Detective Zoller, you were given a copy of this interview, correct?
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, you made some changes to it on June the 9th of 1993.
Yes.
And between those two dates, in fact, you had called back to say that there were some changes that you wanted to make, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I called you at your home on your birthday and we didn't speak. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
I'm going to object to that question.
All right. Now, Mr. Fenno, at the time that you made the corrections to the May 24th report, you didn't mention that this particular information about Berkeley was incorrect, did you?
That's true, yes.
Have you met with the defense attorneys since you talked to the prosecution at the Beverly Hills Police Department in May of '93?
Yes.
How many times?
Once.
Now, may I approach, please, Your Honor? With the report, page 938. May I approach, please? Mr. Fenno, I'm going to show you the last page of this 3-page report. First of all, do you recognize this report? It says May 24th, 1993,
yes.
8:20 p.m.
Yes.
Okay. And did you have a copy of this report shortly after the event occurred?
Yes.
That is the interview. All right. And you see on the third page, the second thing I have underlined in yellow. Do you see the statement there?
Yes.
All right. And does this particular statement that Mr. Menendez was upset with Eric because Eric had turned down Berkeley, is it your testimony now that you didn't say that?
I may have said it. My testimony is that it's not quite accurate.
Oh, and why isn't it accurate?
Because I don't know. I wasn't there when he turned down Berkeley, and I don't know that Mr. Menendez was upset. I told you what happened was the day that Eric got into Berkeley, the Menendez parents were happy. But Eric pulled me aside after and said, I think I'd like to go to UCLA. So that's where I get my information from. So it is very possible that I told you that I thought Mr. Menendez was upset. That would be because I got the impression that Eric felt that his father would be upset.
Well, so what you're telling us now is that you extrapolated from two facts. The fact that you told us on May the 24th of 1993 is, in other words, you knew Mr. Menendez wanted Eric to go to Berkeley, and you knew Eric didn't want to go there. Therefore, it was your impression, or you just decided that Mr. Menendez would have been upset.
Yes.
So that, in fact, you never personally saw Mr. Menendez upset with Eric over turning down Berkeley.
Correct.
So this is just something you kind of made up. Is that right?
It didn't seem like a big deal. I mean, in my mind, Mr. Menendez, I thought, wanted Eric to go to Berkeley, or else Eric wouldn't have told me that on the side. He was worried that his father would be upset with him.
Now, could you describe why you thought Mr. Menendez wanted Eric to go to Berkeley?
He was very excited he got into Berkeley, and Berkeley's supposed to be better academically than UCLA.
Did Mr. Menendez express that at the dinner table?
I don't think we talked about UCLA, but he was excited about Berkeley.
And during that period of time, did he encourage Eric to go to Berkeley?
I'm not sure that he did. They were waiting to hear from Brown as well and from UCLA.
I believe you indicated that Mr. Menendez used to smile a lot.
Yes.
Would you describe his personality, at least when he was talking to you?
Would I describe his personality?
Yeah, would you describe his personality for us, please?
Yeah, generally he was pretty happy. I mean, at dinner he would, make jokes and we'd talk about stuff. He was an interesting person. He had well thought out opinions about a lot of things, and I found him to be interesting and kind of fun, except for when he didn't look like he wanted me around.
Have you ever seen the television show Jeopardy?
Yes.
Okay, did you ever have dinners with Mr. Menendez where you felt like you were on Jeopardy and you were one of the contestants? In other words, did he ever quiz you in that manner?
I'm not sure quite like that, but yes. I mean, we... there were discussions at dinner where he seemed to already know the answer, and we were going to try to figure it out, if that's what you mean.
And did you enjoy engaging in these discussions with Mr. Menendez?
Yes.
And what was Mrs. Menendez doing when you had these discussions with her husband at the dinner table?
I'm not sure. Sometimes she was there mostly. Occasionally she'd go to the kitchen and get some more food or whatever.
Did she participate in these discussions?
Honestly, I don't really remember her being particularly involved.
Now, I believe you indicated that the doors to the Menendez home, the outside doors, were generally unlocked. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you and either of the two defendants ever come and go out of the back of the house where the alley was?
I did once.
All right. Did you have an automobile when you were here?
Yes.
And was that your own automobile?
Yes.
Did you then drive from Boston?
Yes.
And I believe you indicated that in the, I don't know what room you called it, but in one of the rooms there were some French doors. I think you said it was the TV room.
Right, yes.
And is that the room that had bookshelves with lots of trophies on top?
Yes.
And that was the room at the rear of the house near the kitchen, correct?
As you walked in the front door and went straight down the hallway, you go right into the room that I'm talking about.
All right, and in that particular room there were a set of French doors behind...
Yeah, that led toward the jacuzzi.
And those French doors were behind an L-shaped sectional sofa, correct?
Yes.
And that's the TV room?
Yes.
And those French doors were often unlocked?
Yes.
And did you go in and out of those French doors in order to get in and out of the house?
Yes.
Did you ever see either of the defendants do that?
Yes.
And I believe you indicated that when Mr. and Mrs. Menendez watched television, or excuse me, that after dinner that they would generally go upstairs.
Yes.
And you would often watch television in that...
In that room, yeah.
And would you often watch television in that room with either of the two defendants?
Yeah, sometimes.
I believe you indicated that during the period of time that that Lyle Menendez had returned to Princeton, that you were then playing tennis more and more with Eric Menendez.
Yes.
And I believe you indicated he had lots of friends.
Yes.
Did you meet many of those friends?
Yes.
You indicated as well that in the garage of the Menendez home that there were lots of boxes.
Yes.
Okay, what are lots of boxes? Are we talking about 10 or 50 or?
They were all the way to the roof. It was full.
The whole garage?
The whole garage was full.
And was this a double car garage?
I don't think so. I think it was a single car garage.
Okay, so you're talking about then at least 100 boxes.
I guess so.
And you were never made aware of the contents of those boxes, correct?
I believe that I heard that they were from the old house in New Jersey.
But you didn't know what was inside?
No.
Okay. When you had the dinner where the subject of Berkeley was brought up, was that the first time you'd ever been made aware of the fact that Eric Menendez had applied to Berkeley?
No.
Did Eric Menendez ever talk to you before that dinner about colleges he'd applied to?
Yes.
And did he tell you that what did he tell you about where he wanted to go to college?
He had a friend at Brown. He was kind of interested in going to Brown. Maybe. I'm not sure if there was more than that. He talked to the Brown people a lot.
So would you say you had more than one discussion with Eric Menendez about where he wanted to go to college?
Yes.
And did Eric Menendez ever tell you that he wanted to go to college far away from home?
He didn't put it like that, no.
Okay, did he ever indicate to you a desire to get out of Los Angeles and go someplace like Brown, 3,000 miles away from home?
He didn't say anything in that way.
Do you know if Eric Menendez knew how to work a computer?
I don't know. Do I know? I don't think so.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Sorry, I don't think that I knew.
May I have a moment, please, Your Honor? I'm almost done. Did you ever see any physical violence at all between the Menendez parents and either one of their sons?
No.
Now, after the killings of Mr. and Mrs. Menendez, did you ever have any discussion with Lyle Menendez about what had happened on the night of August the 20th of 1989?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope.
A little. I called him on the phone.
And where did you call him?
I called from Massachusetts to his house in Beverly Hills.
And how long after the killings was it, to your knowledge?
Maybe the next day.
And did Lyle Menendez indicate to you what had happened the night before?
I don't think we talked about that. I called him up. I heard what had happened in the news, and so I called and said I was sorry. Was there anything I could do?
All right, did you have any discussion about what Lyle Menendez had been doing the night before when you talked to him that time?
No.
Did you ever have any discussion with Lyle Menendez about what had happened the night before?
No.
Your Honor, I have here a police report I'd like to approach. I'm going to show you the second page of the police report from January the 12th of 1990, which I believe was the telephone interview you referred to. I'm going to ask you to look at the thing that's circled and has some yellow in it.
Okay.
Does that refresh your recollection as to the contents of the telephone conversation you had with Lyle Menendez on shortly after the killing of his parents?
Yes.
And did Lyle Menendez tell you anything about his activities of the night before, Mr. Fennell?
Well, it says, I mean, it doesn't really refresh. I don't remember saying that, but I probably did. And I guess we talked about that he went out the night before.
Did he indicate to you at the time that you talked to him that he had come upon his parents in the den?
If that's what it says there, then I guess that's what I said. I don't remember. What I remember is what I just told you, is that I called to offer him condolences.
All right, and so you don't remember anything else?
I don't remember anything else.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fennell. I have nothing further.
Yes, very good. Mr. Fennell, do you know a young woman named Tracy Baker?
Yes.
And do you recall her being a friend of Lyle Menendez's during the time that you were living there?
Yes.
And you recall back to the episode where Mr. Menendez threatened to kill Craig Signorelli?
Yes.
Oh, do you recall if Tracy Baker was around at that time?
I don't personally know if she. I don't personally remember.
You don't personally remember if she was there that night?
Right. She was around. I don't know. She was around a good bit for about a month or so. It is possible that she was there that night.
Was that month around Thanksgiving? Was it preceding Thanksgiving of 1988? If you remember.
I think so. Jeez. I'm not positive. I'm not really sure.
Okay. Now, you've testified that you had a copy of the interview that the police did with you in May of '93, and you made corrections after you saw that. Did they ever send you a copy of the January interview? January 1990?
No.
Did the police, during the January interview, ask if they could tape record that interview?
They might have. I don't remember. It was.
Okay. Would you have refused if they had asked?
No, I would have let them.
And do you recall how long that January interview was on the phone?
I think it was a couple hours.
And how long is the report of it?
It was 2 or 3 pages. Did you just show me? 2 or 3 pages?
And did that appear, were you surprised when you first saw that 2 or 3 page report that that's all that was written for a 2-hour interview?
Yes.
Did you ever hear Lyle or Eric talk back to their father?
No.
Did you ever hear their father praise their effort if they didn't win?
They did not win?
Yeah,
No.
they lost.
It wasn't like that. It was, no.
There was no support for trying, was there?
Mr. Menendez would tell Lyle what he should have done to win, but that was it.
How many hours a day, when you were living with the Menendez family, did Lyle and Eric practice tennis?
Lyle played for 5 hours a day, and Eric played after school. So Eric played maybe 2 hours a day during school and then more on the weekend.
And during the time you were there, was Eric also being coached? Was he going somewhere for coaching?
About halfway through, they both got a new coach.
And was there additional play with the coach?
Yes.
And do you know if Eric practiced at school also?
Yes, in the spring he did. Yeah.
I might have a moment. Were you aware, Mr. Fenno, of Mr. and Mrs. Menendez's attitudes towards Lyle's girlfriends?
Yes.
And how would you describe that attitude?
I didn't think that they particularly cared for Jamie was sort of medium, and I don't think they liked Christy.
When you say medium, that they were medium towards Jamie, which means they...
She was okay, but not great. I mean, medium.
And what was their criticism, if you know, of Jamie?
I don't think Jamie's from the same social level that the kids were.
At least that was the parents' perception.
Objection calls for speculation.
Are we talking about the parents' attitude?
I believe, I'm somewhat vague on this. I believe that was their attitude.
Did they think she was a gold digger?
I'm not sure.
Did you?
Objection. Improper.
Did Lyle appear to be generous towards Jamie with presents and things like that?
Yes, very.
And did Jamie demand those things?
Sometimes, yes.
I have nothing further.
Ross. And does this complete the examination of this witness at this time?
No.
This time, yes.
No. I think there's something going on right now.
Oh, very briefly, yeah. And I'd like to do it before you. if you could.
All right, we will certainly try.
If you've been impacted by a true crime and would like your story told in your own words, or if you or someone you know has been wrongfully convicted or accused of a crime, please write to crimeincourtchannel@gmail.com and tell us your real true crime encounters. Thanks for watching.